right, ladies and gentlemen, if I could ask you to take your seats, we're going to reconvene the City Council meeting. May I have the roll call, please?
The record will reflect that all members of council are present.
Mr. City Attorney, is our closed session report?
Thank you, Mayor Curry. There's no closed session report this evening.
Please stand and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance, which will be led by Councilmember Henn, followed by the invocation, which will be led by Pastor Bradley Stienstra of the Newport Harbor Lutheran Church.
Please join me.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible.
Let us pray. O God of extraordinary patience as well as great power, if the cacophony of so many different individual voices clamoring for attention at public meetings such as this strikes you as sounding way too much like the terrible noise a group of preschoolers at morning chapel can make as they all try at once to tell their latest personal stories, please don't just give up on us and turn away in frustration. We ask you to wait a while at least. Keep watching and listening, for there is always hope that in the discovery of a shared desire to bring about what is pleasing to you, we can join our divergent voices together and produce the wonderful sound that flows from the spirit of community. Instead of calling upon you to be with us here because we think you might, in some not very clearly defined way, be useful to us in getting whatever it is that we might want included in or excluded from the budget, remind us that you are the one who has called us to be your servants, and that the primary job of all of us is to be of use to you in your goal of mending the brokenness of creation. For tonight, make us worthy of that challenging role. Don't allow us to get lost in the small squabbles in order that we might know the satisfaction that grows out of a meeting that not only conforms to some printed agenda, but fulfills your more lofty purposes. Amen.
Thank you, Pastor. A particularly relevant prayer for tonight. It gives me great pleasure to begin our meeting by introducing a young lady that I first met at the mayor's dinner back in February from Corona Del Mar High School, who was here with a group of other CDM students, who has formed a club called Vesta Dog to raise funds to purchase bulletproof vests for police dogs. What a remarkable achievement. Jenny Conde, please come forward to the podium. And I understand you have, pull that microphone down, and I understand you've got some words for us tonight.
Thank you, Mayor Curry and City Council members for inviting us to this meeting. My name is Jenny Conde, and I'm a freshman at Corona Del Mar High School. Last October, I started a Vesta Dog Club at my school and Vesta Dog Orange County. Here with me tonight is Police Officer Vlad Anderson of the Newport Beach Police Department. He is a resource officer at CDM and is one of the advisors for our Vesta Dog Club. Also here tonight are several of my club members: Natalia Bruning, Candace McKegg, Austin Paskarian, Melody Yu, Kelly Tam, and Emma Sung. The mission of Vesta Dog Orange County and the Vesta Dog Club is to raise student and community awareness of the dangers faced by police dogs and their need for protective vests. Police dogs face the same, if not greater, risks human police officers face in performing their duties because police dogs are often sent to investigate dangerous situations either alone or ahead of their human partners. Canine police officers need to be protected with bulletproof vests, just as our human partners are. The purpose of Vesta Dog is not only to raise awareness of these issues, but also to sponsor and participate in activities to raise money to purchase protective vests for canine police officers throughout Orange County. Our goal is to provide vests for every police canine in Orange County. This year, we have received generous support from many sources. First, we'd like to thank City Councilwoman Leslie Daigle for her generous $500 donation, and we have one of our Vesta Dog t-shirts we'd like you to have. Several local businesses have also donated and have been recognized on the backs of our t-shirts. Dr. Leslie Aspis, California Sense, Corona Del Mar Animal Hospital, Costa Mesa Animal Hospital, Grand Prix Performance, Just Food for Dogs, the Newport Harbor Elks Lodge, Newport Hills Animal Hospital, Rousseau's Pet Experience, Top Dog Barkery, True Grace Skincare, Cover Your Canine, and the Police and Working Canine Foundation. In addition, our club members sold See's candy and these adorable hero canines and attended several local events to raise money for canine vests. We are pleased to announce tonight that we have raised enough money to purchase our first 2 vests, which are for canines Jardo and Elko of the Newport Beach Police Department. Canine Jardo's partner is Officer Mike Fletcher, and Canine Elko's partner is Officer Roland Stukin. The vests we have purchased are a new design by Land Shark Canine. They are high-tech, bulletproof, and stab-proof vests that allow exceptional protection along with flexibility and freedom of movement. Each vest includes hooks for rappelling and an infrared light on the top of the vest, which allows a handler to see the canine if the dog is searching away from the handler. And the infrared light also allows the dog to be seen from a helicopter, but not by the suspect. The vests are custom fit for each dog and cost between $1,200 and $1,800. We worked with the Police and Working Canine Foundation to purchase these outstanding vests for Jardo and Elko. And here are Officers Fletcher and Stukin with their partners Jardo and Elko wearing their bulletproof vests. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. That's a great accomplishment that reflects what great kids we have in Newport Beach and what marvelous entrepreneurs they are. And Chief, I think, do you have a presentation?
Yeah, I just want to first say thank you to Jenny Conde and her team from Vestadog. This is tremendous. What you did is absolutely tremendous, and you can see the vests on the dogs there. I am extremely proud of our canine unit that we have, Officer Fletcher and Officer Stukin, and what they do for us every day. But having this extra protection for their dogs is tremendous. We appreciate that. And because of that, I want to present to you this plaque. It's Vestadog, Orange County. It says, "In grateful appreciation for your generosity and selfless effort to ensure the safety of the Newport Beach Police canines, Jardo and Elko." And on there's a nice picture of Jardo and Elko and their handlers as well. So, Jenny, come on up and let me give this to you. Congratulations. And this too. Actually, I want you to look right there at the camera. Want to get the dogs in here?
All right. Well, we also have a presentation on behalf of the City Council, so why don't we get the whole group to come around here?
And right down there.
Dogs in the picture, and Jenny-
While everyone is assembling, I will put in a plug for the Newport Beach Citizens Police Academy. If we have any citizens that have not signed up to take that 12-week class, I would certainly encourage you to do it, and you'll get to see the dogs in action as part of that training.
2, 3.
We're going to take the police dogs out so those of you who grew up in the 70s can quit being nervous. Notice to the public.
The city provides a yellow sign-in card to assist in the preparation of the minutes. The completion of the card is not required in order to address the city council. If the optional sign-in card has been completed, it should be placed in the box provided at the podium. The City Council of Newport Beach welcomes and encourages community participation. Public comments are generally limited to 3 minutes per person to allow everyone to speak. Written comments are encouraged as well. The City Council has a discretion to extend or shorten the time limit on agenda or non-agenda items. As a courtesy, please turn cell phones off or set them in the silent mode. Now is the time for council announcements or matters which council members would like placed on a future agenda.
Thank you. I'm going to exercise the prerogative to lead off with this item tonight because it's been a busy couple of weeks, and particularly busy on the issue of fire rings. As you know, the city has been under fire from a variety of people with a variety of, frankly, baseless and insulting accusations. But we've been working with the AQMD, who have done significant analysis about the impact of fire rings, and what they found is that each fire ring is the equivalent of a diesel truck driving 564 miles. We have 27 of those rings on Corona Del Mar. We have 31 or 33, I guess, on Balboa Beach. So if you're one of the people who lives adjacent to those, you get a sense as to what the impact is, and I want to commend the AQMD for the good job in documenting those health impacts to our residents. But nonetheless, beach fire rings are a historical part of the California beach experience. People enjoy using them. I did use them when I was a young person. And so we were approached by two of the AQMD board members, Supervisor Sean Nelson and Mayor Miguel Polito of Santa Ana, and they asked us if we could consider doing a demonstration project that would use alternative fuels. We haven't decided what fuel we would use, to see if we could preserve the beach fire ring experience for people, but at the same time minimize the health impacts on our neighbors and neighborhoods, which are actually, as documented by the AQMD, significant. They have asked us to test 10 rings, 5 on each beach, and we have reached a joint recommendation, is how I'll characterize it, to bring that to the City Council to consider that. So we're going to work this out. The AQMD has promised to pay for it. We're going to work out the details with our fire chief about what type of fuels, where they're going to be, how they're going to work, what the staffing is going to be. And we're going to bring that all back so everybody on the City Council can have an opportunity to review it. I recognize that because of the Brown Act, nobody on the City Council really had the opportunity to opine on this before, but we'll have our opportunity to look at it when it comes back. So I want to announce that since it was in the paper this week. Just a couple of other announcements. I was pleased to be with the Newport Beach water polo players, more than a couple hundred of them preparing for Junior Olympics. Newport Beach is a great water polo community, and I was very, very proud of our kids. Congressman Bill Schuster, the head of the Transportation Infrastructure Committee of the House of Representatives, was in Orange County, and I was pleased to spend some time with him at the recent Association of Cities Infrastructure Summit. Along with my fellow council members, I was very pleased to be part of the Balboa Island Parade and to play a role in bringing the Arrested Development Bluth banana stand to Balboa Island. More than 5,000 people liked that on Facebook when it was posted by the Netflix people. So I want to thank Netflix for the publicity about Newport Beach. They say as long as they spell your name right, all publicity is good. But it was a lot of fun, and people came from all over to enjoy a free banana, and I think they had a good time. I had an opportunity to participate with the Crystal Cove Alliance at a reception there. As you know, last week we proposed and agreed to a funding agreement to assist them in the renovation of 17 additional cottages. That will increase the TOT tax generated at Crystal Cove and make that even more of a special vacation experience for people really from throughout the world. I spoke this week at the City of Newport Beach Leadership Academy to some of our senior professionals, and I really enjoyed the opportunity to talk with them. On Saturday, we hosted the first Meet the Mayor and had an opportunity to tour some folks around City Hall and talk about what we're doing here, and I was very pleased with the response that we got about City Hall and all that we have now here for folks. I attended the Athletic Scholarship Breakfast, and once again you hear stories just like we saw today of the great young people of Newport Beach and their extraordinary accomplishments. And then finally, I want to thank Miss Gibson's third grade classes, both the 3A and 3B from Our Lady Queen of Angels School. Every student in the school wrote a little letter to the mayor, which was bound up and sent to me, and I enjoyed reading every single one of them. They're great kids, and many of them have stopped in to sit in the mayor's chair and visit with me, and I've truly enjoyed that part of the job. So with that, Mr. Hill.
Nothing, thank you.
Mr. Petros.
Yes, Mayor. You are correct. It has been a very busy period. I would just like to report on some of the other activities that have been going on in the community. On the 31st, I was pleased to be invited to the Newport Harbor High School Jazz Picnic. We talk that we're taking a focus on arts, and nothing is more important than the arts and our youth. And that was a wonderful afternoon spent with the young people at Newport Harbor High School. On that Saturday, I was invited and honored to be invited as the keynote speaker to the Stop Polluting Our Newport, or SPAWN, annual meeting, where I gave a presentation on sustainability and the practices that are underway in Newport Beach to create a sustainable future, both planning fiscally and with a lot of our capital projects, the way that the city operates. And then finally, one that really took me by surprise, what a wonderful event, at Ensign Middle School to participate in their character awards. Let me tell you, colleagues, if this is the caliber of the children that are coming out of our schools, our future is very bright in Newport Beach.
Thank you. Councilmember Gardner.
There was a good swell this weekend, and that's very important. And my main concern is the tide, is where I surf. If it's low tide, you don't need to bother. And it used to be that the pilot always had a thing in the paper, approximate water temperature, high tide, low tide, surf conditions. They don't do that anymore. So I thought, I'll go to the city website. They will have it. They didn't. We do have, if you go to the Marine Department, they have a phone number that you can call. And you can sit there for a long time and get no response. Now, I'm wondering, since most of the people who come here, visitors, are not surfers. The surfers have their own sites they go to. But wouldn't it be nice that just real easy on our website, not even having to go to the Marine Department, in the summer at least, we had water temperature, surf condition, tide. I think it would be nice for our visitors. It would be great for me. I wouldn't have to then go through all the things I had to go through to finally find out when the tide was. But that's the sort of information that it seems to me people would look for. So that's just a suggestion. Secondly, a question. We had a presentation some months ago about, from the Harbor Commission, about improving the education among people who rent paddle boards, for example, and Duffys and that sort of thing to make it safer. And everybody was very much in favor of it, and the idea was that information would be given out with the business license. Now, I have a habit when something like that happens of thinking it's a done deal. But is it, or is it something we need to bring back to have an official ruling by the council before we can start to do something like that?
So the information was to go out with business licenses specific to that type of business?
To rentals, right.
And it was, okay, I'll follow up on that and find out.
Okay,
I
thank you.
don't know. Okay.
Thank you. Mr. Selich.
I have nothing.
Mr. Henn.
Two things. We have a Balboa Village Advisory Committee meeting scheduled for tomorrow, June 12th at 4 p.m. at Exploration down in Balboa Village. And the agenda includes a review of some survey work that we did with mooring permittee holders that actually park in the area to access their moorings. And also, we're going to talk about, review some additional information regarding some parking field work that was done by our consultant. And lastly, we're going to review the shared parking district and parking standards that staff have come up with and discuss that to provide direction. So it should be a good meeting, and invite all to attend. With regard to the following Wednesday, June 19th at 4 p.m., we will have a meeting of the Tidelands Management Committee. This is the reconstituted Tidelands Management Committee. That will be a continuing Brown Act group. And our first kickoff meeting of that reconstituted group will take place Wednesday, June 19th at 4 p.m., and that'll be at the Community Center meeting room. That is the meeting room right across from Council here. At the Civic Center. And look forward to good attendance at that, too. That's all.
Thank you. Councilmember Daigle.
Yes, I'd like to provide the council and the community with an update, a brief update of the city's partnership with the Irvine Ranch Conservancy on open space management. And as you know, the Conservancy completed construction and trail improvements in Buck Gully Reserve last year on our behalf. And we now have a wonderful resource for the city, including 3.5 miles of safe, sustainable, improved trails open daily, 4 creek bridges brought in by helicopter, And if you ever search YouTube, you can see the installation taking place. They plopped down 4 bridges in 12 minutes, and this helicopter just went right down the canyon. It's a pretty cool video. And then also there's dozens of public programs throughout the year to help people enjoy the land, and many opportunities for residents to get involved in the Gully through volunteer service events. Work continues in Buck Gully to improve native habitat and fire safety. The city has asked the Conservancy to help develop a water-wise demonstration project in the fuel mod zone of the Gully that will show residents what fire-resistant landscaping looks like and how to grow it. Conservancy land managers are working with Shane Burkle of our Public Works Environmental section on this project. And beyond fire risk reduction, the project's also going to help control the growth of invasive weeds in Buck Gully and reduce runoff from the upper gully into the creek and ocean. And I'm also happy to announce that Laura Detweiler, Director of Recreation and Senior Services Department, received an award for excellence and partnership from the Conservancy at their annual volunteer and partner celebration last weekend. And I attended this event. It occurred in Santiago Canyon at a place called Augustine. If you've been in there, it's really pretty neat. These awards recognize individuals who do extraordinary things to partner on the land. And Laura really demonstrated her cooperation and her ability to get things done, and I know that the Conservancy really appreciates working with Laura. Also, the Conservancy accomplishes more and more every day on behalf of the city and land, and I'm proud of our partnership with them. The Conservancy shared with me that they are in the process of appointing an expanded board of directors that will contain nationally known people from the nonprofit and profit and parks field. I'm sure we'll be hearing more about that, but I do know that one board member is the former commissioner of Major League Baseball. So they're really attracting a fantastic board. And given all this success, we have been looking at expanding our relationship in other areas. And at my request, the city recently completed a very small agreement with the Conservancy to conduct some interim projects in the Big Canyon Preserve. The short-term goal is to make a visible difference there for both visitors and native habitats. We're starting small, but as you know, there's a lot to do in Big Canyon. And so it's going to include some trail enhancements similar to Buck Gully with directional signs and trailhead kiosks and temporary footbridges. There will also be invasive weed removal coordinated with local groups. I see them here this evening, the Newport Bay Conservancy. And the weeds that will be removed are also problems for our fire department: artichoke thistle and tree tobacco. And then the longer-term plans, and I'm really looking forward to Councilwoman Gardner's help, is to look at developing a resource plan similar to Buck Gully. And that plan would include concepts for restoration and recreation that advance the city's goals for Big Canyon. So we're looking forward to doing even more things in Big Canyon, and we really had to think about what we were doing in anticipation of also transacting the settlement money that affects that area. And with respect to the Big Canyon projects, I wanted to thank Dave Webb and Bob Stein and Pat Thomas and Dave Kiff, who really helped a lot, and also all of the ideas of the Conservancy. It's been an area that's been very challenging for us over the years, and to come up with realistic, viable concepts was, it took a lot of thinking, and but I think that we will be providing some benefit for the community. So thank you.
Thank you. We're now ready for the consent calendar.
Public comments are invited on consent calendar items 1 through 14. Speakers must limit comments to 3 minutes. Before speaking, please state your name for the record. To the extent that any item is removed from the consent calendar by a council member, members of the public are invited to speak on each item for up to 3 minutes per item. All matters listed under consent calendar are considered to be routine and will all be enacted by one motion in the form listed below. The City Council has received detailed staff reports on each of the items recommending an action. There will be no separate discussion of these items prior to the time the City Council votes on the motion unless members of the City Council request specific items to be discussed and are removed from the consent calendar for separate action.
Thank you. Items to be pulled. Councilmember Daigle.
Number 1.
Councilmember Henn.
I have none.
Councilmember Selich.
I have none.
Councilmember Gardner.
14.
Mr. Petros.
Item 6.
Mr. Hill.
I have none to pull, but I would note that I need to recuse myself on item number 11 as I am an alternate director to the Orange County Sanitation District.
And I have no items to pull, but I will also be recusing myself on item 11 and registering an abstention because I am a director of the Sanitation District.
And just briefly, Mayor Curry, if we could change that recommendation instead of having the mayor execute the agreement, have the city manager execute it.
Okay. Very good. So is there anyone who would like to speak on the balance of the consent calendar, not items 1, 6, or 14? Please come forward. All right, seeing none, is there a motion on the consent calendar?
Mr. Mayor, I'd move the approval of the consent calendar with the exception of items 1, 6, and 14, also noting the recusal on item number 11 of yourself and myself.
And changing that to execution by the city manager.
City manager,
Okay.
correct.
Any discussion? Please vote.
I'll second that.
Second. Thank you, Mr. Selich. Thank you. Please vote.
Prior to reading the vote, I'll read the ordinance title for item 3, an ordinance of the City Council of the City of Newport Beach amending Chapter 15.45.080 of the Newport Beach Municipal Code relating to the periodic review of development agreements. Oh, I'm sorry, Councilmember Daigle, you didn't, I was just verbally. The motion carries unanimously.
Thank you. Item 1, the minutes. Councilmember Daigle.
Yes, I think it's the first time in probably 8 years I've pulled the minutes, so I don't know, maybe there's a new minute taker. But anyhow, there was a few precise statements that I had made that were omitted, so the clerk went back and looked at the video and is providing an amended set of minutes.
All right, so you want to make a motion on the amended minutes?
Yes, I'd like to approve, please, make the motion to approve the minutes.
For a second.
Amended minutes.
Mr. Mayor, I must recuse myself because I was not present at that meeting.
Okay, is there anyone in the audience who'd like to speak on the minutes as amended? Seeing none, I will bring it back. Please vote.
I'm sorry, was there a second?
Oh, second.
Thank
yes.
you. With Mayor Pro Tem Hill recusing himself, the motion carries 6-0.
Okay, thanks. We'll go in order. Item 6.
Mayor Curry.
Mr. Petros.
The City of Newport Beach, in its own housekeeping, has acted to reduce our staff levels, has acted to maintain budgetary levels, all while doing more for the citizens of Newport Beach. We're getting more out of the folks that are working for us while those same levels have diminished. Now, I read the proposed resolution, and the recitals and the actual purpose of the resolution is very lofty. And one would assume that the Coastal Commission would, in fact, take that to heart. It has been my experience, however, that the Coastal Commission has been one of the largest adversaries to Newport Beach moving forward in our pursuit on the behalf of the citizens of Newport Beach. For us to go ahead and suggest in these tough budgetary times that the agency that has little, if any, accountability to the residents and citizens of California should receive more to continue to stymie our efforts seems contradictory to everything that we do. And therefore, I will not support this, and I would hope that I would gain some support in opposing this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Petros. Councilmember Gardner.
Well, in support of it, the Coastal Commission has been underfunded and understaffed for a long time. However, my concern is that the money will just not accomplish what we want to accomplish. I think that if we look at the history of the Coastal Commission, we see that there was an icon who was executive director for many years, Peter Douglas. I think everybody would recognize him as an icon of the coast. I don't know if he was an icon of management, however. To me, this is, as an outsider, this is it's not been a well-managed agency. And I think that money would be better spent of having an outside consultant come in and look at their whole setup and see if there are ways that they can gain efficiencies, and if there is money to be spent in hiring, to see that it's spent wisely. Because just adding new bodies, if the culture doesn't change, is not going to accomplish what the ideal is to accomplish. Still, I think it's, so if we could add something to the effect of that, I know it's wordy, but to not just add money, but to see real change, I think that would make it a more palatable.
Thank you. Any other speakers?
Yeah, I was persuaded by Councilmember Petros's comment, so arguments.
Well, I will say I was too. I think the Coastal Commission needs a significant top-to-bottom management review before we think about supporting further funding for them. There is no motion on the floor. Would you like to offer a motion, Mr. Petros? I think it would be a motion to disapprove, perhaps.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Curry. I would move that we disapprove item number 6, support for increased funding of the local coastal planning.
Okay, is there a second? This is going to be one of those vote yes to get no, right?
I'll second it.
It looks like staff might want to make a comment.
Could we bring it back, though? What's the timing as far as the...
It's going before the budgeting processes in the legislature at this month.
Okay,
Could I try one?
Just wait a minute,
okay.
one second. Are we being strategically foolish? Are we, by doing this, making them even more unhappy with us and more inclined not to get us? I mean, I know that we shouldn't give in to
How
that.
could they be any more unhappy?
I think, Mr. Petros and your colleague, you raise a good point about their individual staffing level. We really looked at this as how can we get our LCP done faster, simpler. What if you struck one of the sentences, if you go on the fly with me, knowing that there's a motion on the floor and it's your motion, that in Section 1, you'd strike the including providing additional planning staff for the commission, so that it just referred to funding for new state LCP planning grants for local governments. And I don't know if there's another section in there you can point out to me if I missed that. That may not be good enough still, Mr. Petros, but I did see this as a good faith effort to support what the Coastal Commission and the city both think should be done, and that is to have our own LCP and to get it as quickly as possible. Good LCP, obviously, but get it done so we don't have to go to them as much.
Mr. Kiff, I completely commend your strategic thinking here, but as a matter of principle, I can't support it. And I will go so far on the record and in the public to say that if we do embark on the LCP, and I will guarantee you that Newport Beach will not tip the hand of this appropriation. The Coastal Commission is probably going to get it anyway. When that happens, if our LCP moves any faster by virtue of this funding, I will buy you a root beer float. So, no, I'm sorry, I can't support that addition. And there is a motion on the floor.
That would be well within the FPP set guidelines for you to do so, Mr. Petros, I believe. Okay, is there any public comment on this matter? Please come forward.
Good evening, Mayor and Council members. My name is George Schroeder. I'm not a big fan of the Coastal Commission. I have attended a couple of Coastal Commission meetings, and I respect Councilman Tony Petros tremendously, and I agree our local coastal plan may not move any faster, and they will probably get their funding. It's possible our local coastal plan might move a little slower. I don't know if it's smart to bite the hand that is not feeding us. So I respect Mr. Petros' right to make a vote as a vote of conscience, but I also would ask other council members to remember that regardless how much we agree with how these people think or not, we do have to negotiate with them. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, if there's no further comments, the motion is to, oh, I'm sorry, please come forward. Excuse me.
Our council members, Denise Oberman. I agree with what Councilwoman Gardner said, and also I would support Mr. Kiff's recommendation. The Coastal Commission is something that we need to contend with, and it's particularly important with the potential revitalization-related projects that are coming up within the coastal zone, as well as the others. We do have to deal with the Coastal Commission, so I would recommend that there be some type of middle ground that is not such an adversarial position for the council's consideration. Also, may I ask a quick question? How much money are we talking about? It wasn't included in the staff report.
Through the mayor, I believe the commission and the folks in the legislature are looking at $4 million statewide to help the commission and localities complete their LCPs.
And the pro rata?
It's not broken up that way, but I think it could be whoever's in the pipeline and or, which we are. We've actually funded most, if not all of it ourselves, but the thought is if we needed additional work, we might be able to apply for one of these grants. But it's not broken down pro rata yet.
But is there any typical range, illustrative range?
We can, maybe Kim can remind us what we're spending on ours, and that's probably typical as to what each locality might spend.
Thank you, Dave. We've so far budgeted $75,000, and we are also writing the plan in-house, so that's for technical studies.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers? All right, seeing none, I'm going to bring it back. The motion on the table is to disapprove the recommendation, which means a yes vote is a vote against the recommendation, which we would not support their funding request. Yes, yes. So if there's no further discussion, please vote.
With council members Gardner and Henn voting no, the motion carries 5-2.
Item 14.
With Councilman Hill and Belich, I was looking at, sorry, I got a little brain freeze there. We looked at interviewed candidates for our committees and commissions, and as Councilman Hill said earlier today, a really, really impressive group of people. It was sort of funny because one person would walk out and we'd look at each other and think, oh, he was or she was really good. And then the next person would come and go, oh, wow, he was really, really good too. And it was getting to be sort of, you had little plus marks against everybody. It was really hard to differentiate. So we will win no matter what. But in the course of it, we spent about 6 hours interviewing. And I think that we might want to consider at some point some changes to our policy because in one of two ways. It was clear to us in several cases that there were one or two candidates that were just head and shoulders, like, boy, if I could vote right now, that's the person I would vote for. And yet we are required, unless we have a waiver, to have two for each position. And so in a sense, that means that what we do is a waste of time in a way. So to either give the committee in the future the opportunity to just make strong recommendations with the caveat that any councilman can always add a name, I think would make those interviews more significant, or have the committee do a rough editing and then let the candidates come in themselves and spend 1 or 2 minutes making their sales pitch. We can't give them 15 minutes because we would have a whole meeting. But either one of those. So if we could come back and have that for a discussion at some point, I think it would be interesting for us. And otherwise, I move the item.
Motion, is there a second?
I'll second it.
Motion second. Is there any public comment on this matter? All right, seeing none, please vote. I think those are good comments, Councilmember Carter.
The motion carries unanimously, 7-0.
All right, public comments on non-agenda items.
Public comments are invited on non-agenda items generally considered to be within the subject matter jurisdiction of the City Council. Speakers must limit comments to 3 minutes before speaking. Please state your name for the record.
Hello, my name is Jerry Russell. I live on Santiago here in Newport Beach. I came to talk to you today about financial responsibility. We're here in this beautiful $140 million civic center. I think that's overkill for a city this size. Just use that as background for what I want to talk about. I'm here today because of 2 items I've seen in the news, and one of them was that I've recently seen that the city has commissioned a study of the wages of the city workers, and has determined apparently that they're not being paid enough. And that really got my attention. Another thing that bothered me too was that I heard that the city had put aside $1 million for the acquisition of art, and that seems a little bit extreme for this size of city as well. I want to point out the fact that every city worker that retires, say with a $100,000 pension, the current present value of that at today's interest rate for 30 years would be over $3 million. Okay, bear in mind here that every city worker is a de facto multimillionaire, and here you're talking about paying them more, and I'm just really not understanding the urge for that. I see that this is instigated from within the city workers. The populace is not clamoring to pay people more. I've never heard comments on the street, boy, I'm really worried that the city workers might quit because we're not paying them enough. That's ridiculous, So anyway, Mr. Petros, yours was the first time I've ever heard sustainability being spoken of in a financial sense. And really consider this, that, there's a limit here. We've spent $140 million on this place. I've got a small family of 3. My portion of that is $5,000, okay? For what I see is just putting you in a more comfortable situation. We had a city hall that worked, and now we have debt, okay? You've got to keep it in control. City workers are very, very well paid. It's inappropriate to compare these city workers with overpaid city workers in another city and saying, hey, we got to keep up. Why don't you compare, city workers to an equivalent job in the private sector? Every city worker a multimillionaire. I'm just really not seeing the rationale for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Russell. Just to point out, what the study did show was that relative to other cities, our workers are paid less.
I understand.
It didn't say they needed to be paid more. It said they simply were paid less relative to other cities, which is something I think everybody should be pleased with. Secondly, we didn't appropriate $1 million for art. We decided we would set aside 2% of development fees when they come in into a fund that can be used to build facilities so that we don't have to do bonds or buy permanent art on behalf of the city. Those monies are pay as you go as they come in. It's not a $1 million appropriation. Thank you, sir. Other speakers, please come forward.
Good evening. My name is Laura Curran. I'd like to talk about the piece of art that's out on the patio by Sarah Wilkinson. She's a local artist, and she donated a very interesting piece of art that actually represents some wildlife. And it's displayed here, and I really would like us to think about putting it somewhere where it comes to better fruition, because it's made out of metal, and it's a natural piece of material, and on the brick it really doesn't come to light. Now, the bunnies are up on the hill, and they stand out. They're actually not a natural feature. They're not even looking like our native bunnies, and they really stand out. People will notice them. In the meantime, we have this beautiful sculpture, and she also has a sculpture at her own home on Marguerite, which could really make a statement and would attract people's attention as well. So I would ask that we consider presenting it either out in the park area or in another area where it comes to a better presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Other speakers, please. Please come forward.
Good evening. My name's John Packer. I'm a resident of 22 years here in Newport Beach. And like the gentleman that preceded, I am very concerned about the rapid increase in public employee compensation over the last 10 years vis-a-vis what's happening in the private sector. In the private sector, salaries aren't going up at a fraction of the pace that we're seeing in the city level, the county level, state level, etc. Last year, the city passed a resolution on total compensation, and I wanted to read to you what you approved a year ago. It says total compensation for individual positions will be measured with respect to market surveys including both municipal and relevant private sector comparisons as appropriate. The study that was recently done violates what you approved a year ago. There is no comparison with private sector employees. And you're missing the boat because 90% of us work in the private sector. So I think this is flawed because there's no private sector. The second flaw that I see in this study, and studies like this, is that they're all biased on the upside. These guys go around and measure city A to B and C, and the conclusions are universally that the city that's paying for the study, their employees are underpaid. I would suggest that maybe the city manager ask these guys for their last 10 reports and see how many times the conclusion was the employees are overpaid and how many times the conclusion was the employees of the subject city are being paid at market. And I would suggest, and I would be willing to bet money, that the conclusion of their last 10 reports are that those cities just so all happen to be underpaid. They use these studies in public sector to turn everybody into a six-figure employee. And that's what's happened here. These are bogus, biased studies. And it violates your resolution that you passed a year ago. My third point on this study is that by reducing the bands, it gives more. It appears to give everybody a pay raise. I don't see anybody that the band got reduced and they got moved to a lower band. Everybody magically always gets moved to an upper band. So that's another bias in this study, is by reducing the bands, everybody gets to jump up one level. So if you pay an extra $10,000 to a director, which doesn't seem like a lot of money, if you look at the retirement, that's hundreds of thousands of dollars. But what also happens is the people that report to that person, now their salaries have to be adjusted up. And so what can be a $10,000 error on compensation can turn into $1 million or multi-million-dollar liability for the city. So this are significant dollars we're talking about here.
Thank you, sir.
I just have two more points I'd like to make.
Well, your time is up, but very, very quickly.
Okay. If you want to get a more accurate view of what compensation should be, I would suggest looking at two factors. The first factor is I would look at turnover. If the turnover is excessive of 25%, there's a problem. If it's under 20%, the employees are voting with their feet that they're happy.
Okay.
My second and last point is that when an employee leaves, I would suggest that you lower the bands and post the job significantly below what they were being paid and see what happens. See how many people that are well qualified apply for jobs that aren't six figures.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Next speaker, please. All right, seeing none, we'll bring it back to the City Council, and we will move on to oral reports from City Council on committee activities. Councilmember Gardner.
Nothing.
Mr. Petros.
A quick announcement that on Monday, the 17th of June, we will be holding the first Bicycle Master Plan Oversight Committee. It will be here in the community room, starting at, I believe, 4 or 4:30. 4:30, I'm sorry, 4:30. 4:30 here on the 17th. We really hope that those interested in bicycle or motoring related issues would join us and bring your advice to us. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hill.
None, thank you.
Councilmember Daigle. Mr. Henn.
None for me.
Mr. Selish.
I have two. The first is the General Plan, Local Coastal Plan Implementation Committee. We had a meeting on May the 29th, and we did two things primarily. One was we took a first look at the administrative chapters of the Local Coastal Implementation Plan, and we also took a look to get further clarification of where exactly is the coastal zone in the city. And so we asked the staff to produce some maps, and there's still some areas of lack of clarity, I guess I would say. So we're asking the staff to look into that a little bit more. And our next meeting is going to be June the 26th at 3:30 p.m. Do you know what room that's going to be in yet?
No, I don't.
Okay. Well, I'll make another announcement on it at the next meeting. That'll be before that meeting. And then the second thing I'd like to report on is the Building Committee. The Building Committee met right before the council meeting today to discuss some issues involving the Civic Center site. We discussed issues that mainly are coming from our neighbors across the street in Harborview Hills, and dealing with some specific subjects. The first one was landscaping along MacArthur Boulevard. We've heard at the council meetings, and I think a number of us have heard individually from different residents across MacArthur Boulevard with concerns over the landscaping, primarily from two perspectives. One is the area between where the existing landscaping ends by the library up to where the parking structure begins, and then also the entire length of the parking structure from the lower end of the parking structure to the upper end. And the committee asked the staff to plant trees and shrubs of sufficient size and spacing along that area, first for the space between the library and the parking structure that would screen and soften the view from the homes in Harborview Hills, and then also on the length of the parking structure to plant some additional trees and shrubs of sufficient size along the entire length of the parking structure. And that doesn't mean it's going to be a complete row of them, but they will be spaced appropriately to soften that effect. Eventually, the landscaping that's in place now will grow to sufficient size to screen these views, but these are looked at as interim types of plantings that may be removed or may stay in place as the landscaping that's already in place matures. And we'll just have to see how that goes. The plant material out there will essentially create a screen along MacArthur Boulevard eventually, but it will need time to grow and mature. The second subject that we discussed was the sale, the appearance of the sale, and the issues around the lighting of the sale. We talked about a lot of different potential solutions, but at the end we decided that we really weren't the ones that had the responsibility to do that. It was the architect. When these plans were presented to the city, we were assured that there would not be glare emanating from the sale and it wouldn't be obtrusive. And so the committee decided that we would refer that back to the architect for them to come up with some solutions to present to the committee to alleviate the problems. And then the third area we discussed was the lights on in the City Hall at night. We have a temporary situation dealing with the commissioning of the building and the fact that workers have to work here late at night. We're almost at the end of that, and it should be over pretty quick here. The city staff is indicating that the policy from now on will be that the interior lights will go off at 8 o'clock. The exterior lights will go off at 9:15. That's to coordinate with the library lighting, and that the janitors will be turning off the lights in the bays of the building they're not working in. We've been getting some complaints that the lights on are on all the bays when the janitors are only working in certain areas, so they will be instructed to turn the lights off in the areas they're not working in. And I would just say as a conclusion to this that this is somewhat of a work in progress. Commissioning a complex of this size and complexity isn't easy. The business of the city has to continue on during the day, so some things have to be done at night here until we get the facility completely up and running in the manner it's supposed to. So we would just ask you to bear with us for a while as we go through this building commissioning process. Thank you.
Thank you for that report, Mr. Selich. And I have no report, so we'll go to item 15. The Mobility Telecommunications Permit for Obelisk located at 2661 Newport Coast Drive.
Mr. Mayor, I need to recuse myself. I have an economic conflict carrier that is a client, also enters into agreements with Mobility. So I'll be in the back room monitoring.
Thank you, Councilmember Daigle. Staff report, please.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Curry. I'm Kim Brandt, Community Development Director. As you mentioned, this is an application for a telecommunications facility, which is proposed to be a obelisk or freestanding facility on Newport Coast Drive. Associate Planner Fern Nueno is going to give an overview of the proposal.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, council members. The project is for an architectural feature, and it can accommodate 2 carriers, the proposed Verizon antennas, and 1 additional carrier. The project site is located at the closed Coyote Canyon landfill site owned by the Orange County OC Waste and Recycling. The lease area is right here, adjacent to Newport Coast Drive near the State Highway 73, which is also the boundary between the 2 cities. Sage Hill School is across the street, and the gas recovery facility system is further south along the street. The lease area is right adjacent to the property line with an existing access road leading up to it and an existing concrete pad that it would be developed on. The proposed structure would be 55 feet in height, and the equipment area would be enclosed with an 8-foot-high block wall and shrubs. This is the view heading north on Newport Coast Drive, and that is the view right when you're exiting the 73. The applicant has stated that coverage for Verizon Wireless in this area is weak with a high probability of dropped calls, and has provided these coverage maps, which demonstrate that the proposed site would increase coverage in the area near Newport Coast Drive and the 73. That's where the proposed site is. The left is the existing, the right is proposed.
Are there any residences there? Or is that by the landfill and the open space?
This is by the landfill and the open space.
Thank you.
Correct. From best coverage to worst coverage, the colors are red, green, yellow, with blue being the weakest coverage area. The applicant has identified alternative candidate sites and has stated that there are no other options available in the area that meet the Verizon Wireless coverage objectives. The 3 sites that they did analyze are the Toll Road exit booth at the north here at the intersection of the Newport Coast Drive and the Toll Road, Sage Hill High School across the street, and at the entry road to the gas recovery facility. Staff is recommending that the City Council conduct the telecom application review and adopt the draft resolution, finding the project exempt from the California Environmental Quality Act pursuant to Class 3, and approving the telecom permit application. The applicant is available for a presentation and any questions you have.
Thank you. Any Councilmember Gardner?
I do question the alternatives because, one, the 20664 Newport Coast Drive, it says that this wasn't acceptable because their mission statement is to develop multi-carrier facilities. Well, I don't know that the city is obliged to worry about the company's mission statement, so that actually could be a feasible solution. How much taller is the obelisk than the actual antennas or whatever you would, do we know? I mean, I was just wondering if it might be better in this case just to have a plain antenna almost.
Sorry.
So I have problems with this. It does seem to be very obtrusive, and it's not serving any residents. I mean, it's serving, so a few people in cars are going to get their phone calls dropped maybe. Well, we all know that that's not the best thing to do anyway when you're in the car. But so I guess I would ask that the applicant come forward and make me change my mind.
All right, we'll invite the applicant to come. We've heard a presentation about the project, but Mr. Petros, let's have your question
I'm sorry.
first.
Fern, could you please describe for me the access, or maybe it's part of the applicant's presentation. The property that they want to erect the obelisk is on city property, but access county property. What the access is through the county as well, then?
Correct.
Landfill.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
All right.
It does bring up, why isn't the county? Do we have an agreement with the county that we get to control everything there?
The county is the property owner, so they do need to sign off on the application. They have a separate contract they're working out with the applicant. However, because it is a telecom permit within the city's jurisdiction, we have to review the application.
Thank you.
Okay. Would the applicant like to make some brief comments? Please come forward.
Good evening, City Council and staff. My name is Margaret, representing Mobility on Agenda Item 15. I'd like to address Ms. Gardner's question in regards to that would be the second alternative location. That one is actually, there is an existing T-Mobile facility there, and it was actually permitted when it was still under the jurisdictions of the County of Orange. And since then, it's been annexed into Newport, and then we were informed that open space, wireless facilities are not allowed in open space, and that is part of the open space zoned section, which pretty much everything on the right of Newport Coast, with the exception of Sage Hill, is zoned open space. And so the only thing we could look at was Sage Hills, which we looked at twice, 2009 and 2011, and we were denied. They were not interested in the project. And so the only alternative we have left, well, besides the Caltrans, didn't work out because they wouldn't allow us access, 24/7 access. So that's why we ended up where we are.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Hill.
What is wrong with the gas recovery facility location? I mean, that seems to be the very top of the hill, and there's already equipment up there, and why is that not a viable site?
Verizon actually is already there. Verizon is there as well as at Signal Hill. Those are two very high locations. And the elevations are so high there that the engineers can't even turn their antenna northwards without interfering into their own network, because Verizon has an existing network to the north, and it would end up just causing interference and drop calls everywhere else too. And so they can't. If Fern, would you mind bringing us back to the propagation, the coverage maps? If you'll notice the two red dots, or two red blobs, that's called Newport Ridge and also Signal Hill. Notice that the red, which is the best coverage, actually just cuts off on the top there, because they can't even point any antennas northward without causing, there's actually sites up north, further north of our proposed area.
Yep. Thank you. All right, let me, yes?
Sorry, I'd also like to speak, if you don't mind, on behalf of Mobility. Can I put this here, or where do I put that?
Just state your name, please.
My name is Gary Jabara. I'm the founder and CEO of Mobility. I'm a resident of Newport Beach and have been for over 30 years. I employ over 200 people here in the city of Newport Beach. Our corporate headquarters are here. You may or may not know that Mobility is the largest privately held cell tower company in the United States. We own cell towers in all 50 states, Mexico, Nicaragua, Guatemala, Canada. We are a licensed public utility. We have the right to take possession through condemnation and erect facilities without permission on public rights of way, but we choose not to do that. We work with city councils all over the United States. I took a special interest in coming here tonight because having been through many, many hearings on these things in the past, I like to remind those that might be opposed in the audience here, and I know there's something that's been registered from a few gentlemen up in Newport Coast, that these days it's not about vanity, gentlemen. It's about utility, and it's about necessity. I don't know how many of you have lived here long enough to remember the Denise Huber case that disappeared on the 73 freeway with a flat tire. That young woman disappeared and was never heard from for 3 years because she didn't have any cell service and she couldn't call her parents because she had a flat tire. I don't know how many of you read the article in the Orange County Register recently about Pam Yoma, whose 2 daughters were killed on Jamboree in that horrific car crash a little while ago. She found out about her daughters because she followed the Find My iPhone app on her iPad, and she and her husband drove down to the hospital following the dot. We're told that her daughters weren't at the hospital, and then followed the dot to the coroner's office, and that's where they found their 2 daughters. And had there had been no cell phone service, she wouldn't have been able to do that. So, one last comment here. Cell towers are the last thing in the world anybody wants to put up. What we try and do is stealth them first. What we try and do is find a facility where they are able to be placed on the second. We did work diligently with Sage Hill, but their existing facilities did not work. And there was another letter written here by, I believe, Jay Mosher, who said that potentially the difference in lease costs, maybe at Sage Hill, drove us away. Well, that's inappropriate. My wife and I gave over $1 million this year to Sage Hill to build a track facility and a football facility there for the kids. Anyway, this is about public safety. There's no cell service at Sage Hill School. If there was a gunman or somebody to go into that school, God forbid, nobody can make a phone call. If any of your wives or children or family or friends were to be stalled on the 73 freeway, they can't call for help. If somebody was hiking in those trails over there beneath your homes and they were bitten by a snake and there's snake warnings everywhere over there, they can't make a phone call. This isn't about vanity, this is about utility. You know, I applaud the city for this beautiful city hall and your predecessors for driving hard to make progress. I mean, I remember the 73 freeway and the arguments in the 73 freeway that nobody wanted, but we did it, and it's great. So this is about a tower that will provide wonderful public service, wonderful public safety for a much-needed section of the city.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Mr. Selich.
Why did you pick an obelisk for the design, say, as opposed to a tower that might be more conducive to the architecture in Newport Coast?
There's a provision and a process under which we followed to get there.
Hi. It is our understanding, based on the code, zoning code, that for a freestanding facility, an architectural element is preferred over, say, a faux tree. And so this being we understand this is the gateway to Newport Beach, one of the 3 gateways, and we felt that obelisk would be able to celebrate the incoming of people into the city, just as the obelisk at the Spectrum, Irvine Spectrum, signals, you're welcome for people to go over there as well. Westminster as well has a obelisk there that welcomes people, that signals that you are approaching the city. We just feel that this is the appropriate design, the best design we can come up with without having any existing structures in the area. And we feel that it is a better reading than having drop-top calls signal that you're coming into the city of Lake Forest. So.
Thank you. Any other question? All right, let me open this up for public comment. Anyone who would like to speak on the matter, please come forward.
Good evening, Council. Dan Wampole, resident of Newport Coast. I talk to you with a couple hats on. The first one is as president of the Newport Ridge Homeowners Association, adjacent to the landfill, and vice president of the DeSoro Homeowners Association, that looks down on the landfill. I can't believe for a moment that we would consider in this open space putting an antenna or an obelisk. Wearing another hat as a former member of the Communications Committee for this city, we need cell coverage. No question about it. It's our lifestyle, and it's important to have. But I believe that there are other possible locations. There is nowhere in Newport Coast that cell towers are really recognizable in normal travels. We provided a bunch of pictures, I think, that you can see. And I think that this area has some hills that are close to, that could cover those dead spots along the 73 and Newport Coast Drive without such a negative impact on our open space.
Thank you, Mr. Mumpole. Next speaker, please.
Hi, Jim Walker, Mayor and City Council. I am a resident of Newport Coast, and, I would support this tower. I've gone up and down that particular part of Newport Coast on Newport Coast Drive and had the experience of no service and calls dropped. The problem with Newport Coast, unfortunately, as has been stated, is there's definitely an inconsistency in the reception up there. The other thing that I would say in terms of the visual effect, this is a landfill. It's not exactly a homeowner's area. I think it'll go unnoticed. I think what's really more detrimental to Newport Coast is if you go to the top of the Newport Coast and look at all the cell towers and all of the antennas that are sticking up that are very evident at the very top of the hill, to me that's more of a issue than one tower. And so I would ask you to consider that. I think what the gentleman was talking about in terms of Sage Hill, the issues that we have with the lack of coverage up there, it's very frustrating to the residents and to the people that are traveling Newport Coast Drive and entering into that particular part of Newport Beach to have no cell coverage during that period. Thank you.
Thank you. Other speakers? Please come forward.
Mayor, City Council, Denise Oberman. I can't help but feel that there must be a less obtrusive form of design for the cell towers. That is an obtrusive structure. I go to Newport Coast, and for utility, I enjoy the open space, and I think we're losing a lot of our ability to see out. So rather than being bullied by vanity versus utility, I would ask that the council remand for an alternative design that isn't 55 feet high and that isn't so obtrusive to our view. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public speakers? Please come forward.
Hello, Mayor and Council members. I have lots of friends and clients who live up in Newport Coast, and I think if we always took a vote, if you wanted a tower next to your home or where you had to look at it, I don't think we would have cell coverage anywhere. I do respect the residents' concerns about it being an unattractive tower, but I'm more concerned about, I do believe it's come to a point that it is a public safety issue, and the fact that there are blackout spots on Newport Coast Road and the 73 freeway, whatever you do, we have to find a way to get cell coverage in. Whatever tower goes in, it should be mandated that it take the other carriers also. So if you have AT&T, Sprint, or anything else, that they all would be at the same tower. I don't know what the height should be. I think to dictate to them it can't be 55, it has to be 30 feet. If it's a 30-foot tower that doesn't cover the area, then what's the point? Okay, if there's a better place to put this, I can't imagine why they would pick a place that would irritate people, but whatever you do, please follow up on it, and let's not have a dead area where a person riding their bicycle could get hit by a car and lay on the side of the road and bleed to death because they can't call somebody. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers? All right, seeing none.
Hi, my name is Cynthia Jolly. I'm with Mobility. Good evening, Honorable Mayor and members of the City Council. I would just like to underscore that this is 4 years in the making. I've been working in site development, and at every opportunity we like to work with the city and with the residents and with our homeowners to make sure that we're choosing the right design for the site. And just to kind of reiterate what staff wrote in their report is that this is consistent with the general plan and the zoning code. We took kind of the lead from them because that we know that this landfill, its future use is going to be a golf course. So we're an accessory use to that golf course. And as far as the obelisk, well, after doing a co-location or attaching to an existing structure, the next is a stealth application, which is a monument. So I just want to implore with you that, we're taking your lead, and we would like to
get a positive approval this evening, so I appreciate
Can you
your time.
review with me the issues with the toll plaza? What were the problems there?
With the
73 toll plaza.
Caltrans denied our permit?
Yes, we actually submitted an application to the City of Newport Beach, but Caltrans denied our permit based on the fact that they will not allow us 24/7 access. There is only one, basically a pull-in area for our cars to park to that toll road location, and Caltrans would not allow us to have that space. And for our facilities, we need 24/7 access. In case there are any issues, our engineers, technicians can go and fix the issues, and that's the real deal killer for any wireless facility.
All right, thank you.
Before you sit
get
down.
one shot.
Just to help you understand, we also built those 4 sites on the 73 freeway through the hills there to the 91 freeway, and they're actually on Irvine land. The Caltrans allowed us access to build them, but they denied us access to service them. So to service a tower, we actually have to travel, the back roads of the Irvine forest to service them. So just to help you understand Caltrans.
Mr. Henn.
Yeah, I heard somebody say that you do make every effort to work with the citizens in the neighborhoods. Were any of the homeowner associations contacted here to ask their view of the architecture or this proposal?
We went through the proper channels through City of Newport's zoning process, and notification was given as standard, yeah.
What's that? Mailing out to, all the households within a certain, that's not the answer I was expecting. I mean, it seems to me that if you make every effort to work with the homeowners and the neighbors, you would make an independent effort to contact those homeowner associations around there. It's not like you have to contact 2,000 people. I mean, there's a limited number of homeowner associations in the area. And so I think the answer is no. There was no effort to contact them as it relates to either the tower location or the design of the tower?
Not for the homeowners associations.
Okay.
Thank you. All right, so you got your chance. Thank you. Any other questions from the council? Any other public speakers? Come forward, ma'am.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the council.
Give me your name and where you live.
Oh, sure. I live in Upper Newport Bay. My name's Christy, and I'm here today to discuss with you guys wildlife.
Well, that's not for on the agenda. We're talking about
Oh.
cell towers.
Okay.
You missed that.
Sorry.
You missed public comment. Sorry.
Okay, sorry.
Thank you. All right. Any other public speakers? All right. Seeing none, I'm going to bring it back to the City Council.
Mr. Mayor?
Mr. Henn?
Yeah, so I have a couple of questions here. The thing that troubles me about these, I understand the need for cell phone communications and so forth, but the thing that troubles me about these applications is that I always have the feeling that we are simply taking the word for it of the applicant that in fact there are no other alternative places, and that in fact they really tried hard to get some other alternative and it didn't work, and that in fact it has to be a 55-foot structure. Do we ever apply any independent analysis of these statements that are made by the applicant associated with this? Do we retain an independent expert to review what we're being told to determine whether or not it's
Yes, we
fully
do.
disclosive?
We do for most applications, and I'll let Associate Planner Nueno indicate the review for this particular application. But we do have that consultant capability.
We have in the past, depending on the application. We did not for this one. There's different issues with that is the coverage maps, sometimes they can't tell the variation between if it's approved at 55 versus 50 versus 35. It's hard to tell without going out there and doing an actual test. I think maybe the applicant can go into that more. But, reviewing the coverage maps, and it is coming from their engineers, and we're not getting other information from that. But on the other aspects, we did talk with Caltrans, but they submitted an application for a telecom permit for that site, and we had communications with them then. And we told from Caltrans that it wasn't working out between Mobility and them to work out their agreement, and then Mobility withdrew that application. And the other only feasible site in the area would be the Sage Hill School, and as they said, that Sage Hill was not open to that, and their engineers showed that it wouldn't work for meeting coverage in part of this area up here.
Mr. Petros.
No, it's
Mr. Hill.
I haven't heard anybody say that we don't need a cell tower, but I have heard a great deal of objection to the design. I guess I would like to know what other kinds of creative designs might be available, and then is there any way that I mean, how can we back check location and criteria for location? I mean, it's almost like we got to get on the head start of this thing, and we got to go out and hire a consultant to tell us zone maps of every place that a cell tower could be put in the city, instead of reacting in this way. I mean, I come back to the Signal Hill. I mean, heard that. I mean, the groundwater replenishment station is not the most attractive thing, but it's already there and it's already ugly. So how much uglier can it get? Maybe something of character in there might even enhance it. I can't comprehend why, with our technician, totally out of my pay range, but why we can't aim antennas to deal with areas that we're trying to gain coverage in. And so I guess there's just this huge void of, do we have the right information? And then with respect to aesthetics, are there other aesthetics that we could explore if the objection is innocuous? I have a tough time because of the hour, but coming up with a 55-foot item that does represent Newport Coast.
Well, let me say this.
I just wondered, is it possible? I think one of the problems is that this is a low area, so you have to go up high to get your thing. Are there any rises? Say you can't get, but are there any rises where you could put it where the tower itself could be shorter because you'd still have the same coverage, which would make it less obtrusive, perhaps? I'm not asking you to answer it off the top of your head, but that was just.
Well, the one thing I don't think we should do is to try and design this from the DS, because we end up with unusually designed things when we do that. But let me say this, because this is my council district. I think we do need cell service in this area, but I also think we need to have a little bit more involvement of the homeowners association and the neighbors in finding the right spot and the right location and the right aesthetics for working this out. So, and I see my colleagues here from the Newport Coast Association. I intend to support a cell site ultimately here, but I think what I'd like to do is propose that we continue this item until the first meeting in July and give Mobility and the neighbors the opportunity to visit with each other and perhaps come back with a different alternative. And I'll ask Ms. Brandt, do we need to, if we deny this, we have to make certain findings? Do we have to make the same findings if we simply continue it?
No, Mr. Mayor, you can continue it to a date certain. I would recommend that it would not be the first meeting in July, but the second meeting in July to give adequate time.
Well, I would recommend that we continue this to the second meeting in July, and that we ask the applicant and the homeowners associations to get together and address the aesthetics and location, and share with them your thoughts about why certain places don't work. I know that they'll be reasonable in working with you about that, and they'll share with you their thoughts about the correct shade of beige and Spanish style for the obelisk. And Mr. Henn?
I could support that motion if it also included a request of staff to have some independent analysis on the technical aspects of this. I see an obelisk with 4, it looks like broadcast panels, or I don't know what you call them, but there's 4 panels in there that apparently are driving a 55-foot height. I don't understand why does there have to be 4? Could there only be 2, and could it be a 30-foot height or a 35-foot height if that were the case? But beyond that, I would like to see some independent analysis of the technical aspects of this in terms of coverage and location, before we're asked to agree to this.
Mayor Curry.
Mr. Petros.
I would also support that motion with the expectation that whatever comes back is not this, that there be a real effort made to come up with something that is much more palatable, given the utility needs, but that achieves the aesthetic objectives.
Okay, thank you. Well, that would be my motion then to continue this until the second meeting in July so that staff can develop the independent analysis requested by Mr. Henn, and the applicant and the Homeowners Association have the opportunity to work together on a mutually agreeable proposal.
I'll second that.
Mayor Kerr, could we just have the applicant indicate their concurrence with the continuance?
If we agree with a concurrence or disagree with a concurrence, can you explain to me the implications of both? As a public utility, we can start action to take possession through condemnation on any public right-of-way in the area.
Well, we'll probably vote you down if that's what you want to do.
That's fine. That's fine. We've worked on this site for 4 years. These things are at a particular height because that's what, and you can independently verify this, that's what the propagation dictates to achieve, safe and appropriate coverage. As far as stealth goes, there are trees, which nobody likes. There are monuments, which I think more people prefer. We'd be certainly willing to design whatever you and your district would appreciate or approve. I know that we've notified all the adjacent residences as the code and the city mandate. And I think the city...
I think I'm offering you an opportunity to sit down with the homeowners and work this out over the period of the next 6 weeks so that we have a mutually agreeable thing. It gives you a chance to either make your case with them, or if it can't be done, come back and say it can't be done, and then we'll vote on the merits of it. If you'd prefer, I'll offer an alternate motion that we deny this for application. It's up to you.
Okay, well, we'll sit down with the city in the hopes then that, Mayor Curry, that the homeowners will work with us to come up with something that they would approve from a aesthetic perspective.
I have no doubt that they will.
Okay.
Any further discussion?
Well, and I would encourage the homeowners to do that. I think there needs to be a genuine effort on both sides.
Okay. Please vote. No. Did we get a second? Were we properly documented over there? Okay.
I seconded it.
Okay, very good.
With that, the motion carries 6-0 with Councilmember Daigle recusing herself.
Thank you. Go forth and do well. All right, item 16, the adoption of the fiscal year GAN limit.
So, Mr. Mayor and council members, this is one of two items before you tonight about the city budget. We have a more detailed presentation on the second item. The first item is a relatively routine process described in the staff report. If you'd like more comments than that, we can provide that. But basically, we're asking you to adopt the appropriations limit, otherwise known as the GAN limit, for the city. We routinely have a GAN limit higher than what we expend. So this is something that the council members who have been here a long time are pretty familiar with our request to adopt.
I move the item.
I will second the item.
Motion and second. Is there any public comment on this matter? I would only add that I knew Paul Gann. I worked with Paul Gann to make this a requirement. It used to be one that actually had some meaning until it was changed, which was unfortunate. Seeing no further any conversation with the council, motion and second. Please vote. We're not set up to vote.
Not letting me vote. Oh, Councilmember Daigle. Hold on one moment. Let's try this again. If you can vote again, Councilmember, please. Thank you. The motion carries unanimously, 7-0.
All right. Item 17, Resolution 2353 regarding fiscal years 2013-14 budget adoption.
So, Mr. Mayor and council members, this is the main item that we've been leading up to through a couple of study sessions. This is the public hearing at which you would adopt the proposed budget for the fiscal year that starts on July 1st. Among the things, I'm going to have Dan take over and make a brief presentation kind of reminding everybody where we are, where we were. One of the key things that you'll want to look at tonight is the checklist. And we've looked at that with you for at least one meeting, and others have offered suggestions to it. I'll let Dan take it from here.
Thank you, Dave. If we can get the presentation up on the screen. So as we've started each one of our budget presentations, we want to reiterate that our budget is balanced. It increases our investments in parks, buildings, and beautification projects, puts more police officers on the streets while reducing total staffing levels. We've been through an extensive review process. We started with Finance Committee in May. We've held 2 council study sessions. The Planning Commission reviewed the CIP and made sure that it was consistent with the general plan. And we're here today to hold a public hearing, review the checklist, obtain citizen input, and hopefully adopt the budget with revisions. So with that, this is the first part of the proposed checklist, which includes a slide showing the revisions to the general fund operating budget. If I can get a nod when you're done reviewing that, I'll move on.
Well, let's just do this. But would anyone like to pull anything off of the checklist?
Yes.
Councilmember Gardner.
The Newport Bay Conservancy, the transition to cultural arts contract.
Okay, it's item 11. Anyone else?
I don't necessarily need to pull number 3, management compensation adjustments, if I can get a clarification from the city manager. And that clarification is, will these bonuses be PERSable or not?
Councilmember Daigle, if you don't mind, why don't you go ahead and pull that off?
Okay.
And I do have a little presentation I want to talk about it, and I appreciate everybody's feedback on that.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. All right, so anybody else?
Now, what about, there are a number of other items that aren't on here, but that because we haven't really gone over the checklist in detail, because I have other things I have questions on that aren't on this slide.
Well, we're talking now about the 16 items that are on the screen.
Right,
We'll
but
go
will
to
we
the
have a
next
chance
ones.
to talk to the others as well?
Yes.
We're coming up.
Okay, because I also had a question about the number 12. When we looked at the savings, it just went really fast, and it might be fine, but if you can inform us on that again, that would be helpful. And that's not the $50,000 one, it's like the $450,000 one. My screen only shows 16 items.
Do we have a slide for all of these that are coming up later on?
Yes, we do.
All right, let's do, if we can, council members, let's deal with these as they come up on the screen so that we know, and they know what we're talking about. Okay, so we've pulled we are sort of holding for further discussion items 3, 7, 11, and 12. If there's no objections on the other items, we'll sort of deem them by consensus. We'll come back and get public comment later, and we'll adopt the entire thing. Is that good? Should we talk about these now, or should we go through the rest of the list?
Why don't you go through the rest of Dan's presentation, because some of that may cover some things that you're interested in, and then I'd come back to you with a recommendation to act on this, and at that point we could talk about the individual items,
Okay.
Of which I hear 3 now.
All right, but let's, there's 4, 3, 7, 11, and 12.
And Mr. Mayor, I believe Councilman Daigle did not intend to pull 12?
No, there was something about,
We'll get to
maybe
that,
I have the wrong
later.
project, but I recall something in excess of $300 that related to streetlights.
This is the proposed non-general fund checklist, not including CIPs.
All right, I don't see that there's a lot here that can be dealt with. Does anyone have any items here they want to take off the list? Okay, let's continue.
And these are the proposed revisions to the CIP checklist.
Number 4. I think, Leslie, this is the one that you were interested in, number 3.
Yeah, there you go. Thank you.
All right,
So
not,
just so I...
not 12, but 3.
Councilmember Daigle pulled 4, and, sorry, Councilmember Gardner.
No, I didn't
pulled
pull 4.
Okay.
3. Yeah,
All right.
that's the one, please.
Okay. All right, what's next?
We have a few revenue estimate adjustments.
Well, we're not going to decline a revenue adjustment, I don't think.
No, but actually, we have 2 number 1s up here, and Dave Webb is just reminding me that this 50,000 is the link to the first 50,000 that you saw. It's an SCE project where they're giving us $50,000 to do this demonstration project. So the earlier item is the appropriation of the expenditure of that. So it sounds like you probably want to talk about the one on the page just previous to this for 650.
Correct. That's
right.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's it. Thank you.
So this is the end of the checklist that we have on in the presentation.
All right, then let's go back to the first pages of expenditures, and let's look at those and go through them. So first one is the management compensation adjustments. Mr. Kipp, I think you wanted to make some comments on this.
Susan, are you able to pull up a presentation, an extra one there? I'll give you that's the one, yeah. And I might need the clicker. See if it's working. It's good, it's working. There's a couple of people in the public commented during public comment. I know a number of folks are watching at home, and I think I'm going to be really candid and blunt about something, and that is some things you saw in the paper this week and last about the Fox-Lawson report. And this was, so I'm going to go through this fairly quickly and certainly welcome your comments. The Fox-Lawson report was an executive comp study that's part of a much larger study the city is doing right now, setting everyone's classification and compensation. And I'll tell you why that's important. But one of the things it didn't do was recommend that I get a raise. It didn't recommend that anybody get a raise, yet this was flat out posted right in the middle of the Register's editorial. That's just false. It didn't say that. No one got a raise as a result of that report. People keep omitting this one when they write about it. This is a requirement of PERS rules that every position in the city be part of a classification and have an established range. We're doing this because we have to do this. The budget item you see asks for $35,000 in funds for what I would consider to be one-time bonuses. They don't count towards retirement. If spread around the executive staff, and I'm not even proposing doing this, you're talking about $3,000 a piece. Significant amount of money, but you're not talking about some of the numbers that have been thrown around in emails and articles. Mr. Packer had some really interesting comments. I want to compare something between, and because it's a good picture of where city employees are today versus yesterday, and I'm going to compare me to my predecessor. This is kind of what it looks like if you take current dollars. So you inflate Homer's last salary. It was $247, and what's something that's not expressed in any article is what we contribute to our pensions. It's a very important pension. We all think it's generous, and we're all appreciative of it, but we're paying more through it. So if you just compare me today to Homer, I'm earning $27,000, almost $28,000 less, and I'm fine with that. I'm not asking for a raise, but this is something that you would not have seen in any of the articles or emails about this, and that's in large part because I make a little bit less, and I pay a lot more in my pension contribution, and this is consistent with what other city employees are paying. The council has asked every employee to pay a lot more for their pension contributions, and I think everybody's done so relatively willingly. So why set these ranges? Well, ranges are commonplace across the private and public sectors. They do a couple of things for us. They limit or actually avoid pension spiking by having outlier salaries. They do make alignment across inside the organization and outside, so that department to department is aligned, function to function, and outside, city to city. And another good point Mr. Packer made was about the total comp philosophy. There are a lot of positions that the current study will look at in the private sector that are very comparable. Field maintenance worker, fiscal clerk. Those are very common at comps in the private sector, and we will use those. It's a little bit more challenging to comp, say, the library director or my position to some extent. But so these also set up progression steps within career paths. They give certainty and equity to our pay structure, and they also should be reviewed and updated regularly. This city has not had that done. We have not had appropriate ranges or pay structures, and we needed to do that. And let me talk about how we do it. The council selects agencies or cities to compare. Then the firm, again, this is Fox Lawson, they seek common job classifications across those agencies. They're not always alike. Our Public Works Director, Dave Webb, does different things than a Public Works Director in other cities, so they try and equalize that as best they can. And then they try to show what's the 50th and 60th percentile. And the council specifically picked the 50th percentile of those salaries. And then the next thing to do is to pick a distance within those ranges. I'm going to show you some graphics about what those things look about. By the way, here are our comparison agencies that we used. This is just an example of different cities, same position. They look at their salaries. There's a low and a high. But if you look at each one of those things, the 50th percentile is a little lower than median in this case and lower than the 60th percentile. The council picked the 50th percentile, saying we needed to be targeted around that. Then the next thing, I mentioned distance within ranges. Previous to this study, there's about 22% between the low and high end of the range, and that's generally. So that, in other words, if you were in the middle, 11% of your wage was below and 11% was higher. What that does is it limits access on the low side as well as the high side. And Mr. Packer also raised this question of, can you bring in an inexpensive employee? Well, right now we can't. But with the right ranges, we could, because the ranges would be low enough to allow us to do that. It also, if you don't have a large enough range, it limits your opportunities to advance across a career. The best practice, and you could check this in any private or public agency, is about 50%, so 25% on each side. So the Fox Lawson recommended, and the council chose that 50% between low and high. And here's just an example of what that might look like. Jumping back to the previous slide, this 50th percentile position was $151,000. The high end of that range would be $188,000, the low $113,000. This is an important slide. This is from the FLA, the Fox Lawson study itself. You see here the old ranges. They were narrow. They were in the kind of pink or peach. And you see where the salaries were within those ranges. And you see where the proposed new ranges are. And they're the larger gray boxes. They're a lot broader. They're 50 points apart instead of 22 points apart. You could see, contrary to what you might think in the register, you could see a lot of those dots are above the line. The study did not just show that everyone was undercompensated. In fact, it showed that in some cases, people are overcompensated. So another important point about this study, it was based on salary. And then it added a geographic labor factor. But what it didn't look at was total comp. And arguably that may have been the better measure, because that includes what employees are picking up, what they're deducting from their paychecks. It didn't include the level of the health benefit. So why is this a concern? Because employees here tend to pay more for their pension cost, anywhere from 8 to 12.3% of pay, than employees in other agencies. That could be a 4 to 8% difference. And then we receive slightly lower health benefits, but what this means is many Newport Beach employees are further behind the comparable cities than is visible unless just salary is compared. So once the ranges are set, what happens next? The council can hire within the range. Remember, the council hires 3 people, me, Aaron, and Leilani, and our successors. The city manager can hire within the range, and those are generally just the executive positions, the fire chief, the police chief, the finance director, more. And this is assuming the budget is available. The city then becomes compliant with PERS rules. Again, we're not compliant right now. It doesn't mean people will get raises or go to the top of the range. So this is my closing slide. Let me emphasize a couple things. The Register editorial was wrong. Ranges are not raises. The FLA study did not recommend that I get a 22% raise. It made no recommendation for me. Setting ranges is required by law, and every city that's a member of PERS, dozens of them in Orange County, either has ranges, is working on ranges right now, or is out of compliance. So for some reason, we're the tip of the spear because we're working on this. Setting ranges is good personnel practice. It doesn't mean raises, and it doesn't mean everyone goes to the top of their range. I mean, how nonsensical would that be? That's just ridiculous. So the 35K proposed is across several positions for one-time bonuses. With that, I'll get off my soapbox.
So just to be clear then, Mr. Kiff, what's in the budget here, or what's in the budget checklist, is $35,000 that you will be able to allocate as one-time bonuses to executive management personnel, of which there's, 10 of them or so, 11 of them? Maybe 14?
About 10 that I oversee.
About 10, right. So take $35,000. If everybody got the same, it would be $3,500. They probably won't do that, but that's the magnitude of what we're talking about. And to Councilmember Daigle's question, if they're given as one-time bonuses in that way, does that mean that they're PERSable?
If they're given in that way, all of the experts are telling us that it is not PERSable.
Great. Thank you very much.
Mr. Mayor, I wanted to thank and recognize my colleagues and yourself personally for also opposing these anything PERSable merit pay increases, and these innocuous sounding PERSable bonuses morph into taxpayer nightmare over the years. And as our actuary had indicated, a $30,000 pension spike means $450,000 in costs over time. So the council has worked effectively to reform pensions over the years, and paring back abuses will take time and perseverance. That was the core issue that I raised, was that these one-time bonuses not be PERSable. So I appreciate that these will not be PERSable. With respect to the Fox-Lawson study, sometimes I have awareness and perspective and insight that others may not have. And when I raised the issue, it was to point out what I saw as fundamental flaws to that study. And when you use the example of the librarian, I had shared with the council at the last meeting a actual salary survey. The council had never received that. So we did not have the base data which showed us that the median salary for the librarian is $135,000. Our librarian is being paid top at $158,000. Now, when Fox-Lawson looked at librarian pay, they did their survey. Well, Fox-Lawson came back and said $201,000 is the median. Now, median means midpoint, and we know there's no librarians out there at $201,000. So what did Fox-Lawson do? Well, what they did is they created a new salary band, and they took librarians and they brought in private sector chief information officers. Now, this is not a true job comparison. They don't do the same things, and I don't think the city wants the IT director at Citibank running our library. And our librarian probably doesn't want to work at Toshiba. So they weren't true job comparisons. And then the second flaw is that it wasn't total compensation. It didn't factor in pensions. For example, at the city, at the age of 55, if you're an employee, you've been here 30 years, you make $140,000 a year, only 1 year, then you retire at $105,000 per year. That benefit simply does not exist in the private sector. So when we're doing these surveys, we shouldn't just do salary, we should do total compensation. So the numbers that you are seeing on the city website and on Fox-Lawson and what was given to the council are only those ranges, those bands that were conjured up by Fox Lawson. The council and the public has not seen the actual medians of what employees pay. So that consultant work product the taxpayers have paid for should come to the council so that we're fully able to comment on things. Right now, we're completely handicapped because we don't know what actual compensation is. We know what Fox Lawson has fabricated, but we don't know where actual compensation in that. I absolutely agree that examination of salary is responsibility of this city. We should be doing it regularly, but we should be hiring consultants that have, in my view, a credible methodology. And I don't think that Fox Lawson does. And it isn't just the executives, but employees have come to me, for example, a mechanic, and is saying, I'm being compared with a gardener. So those are the problems that I see with Fox Lawson. And I think the information should be released to the council as to what actual median salaries are, so that we know that, and we're not simply relying on a consultant who's created salary bands with private sector other jobs. Thank you.
Mr. Henn?
Yeah, I could spend a lot of time talking about this tonight. I spent a 30-year career in private industry, not municipal governance, private industry, as a chief financial officer, but also as a chief administrative officer in 2 cases for Fortune 500 companies. In one case, I completely designed and administered an entire performance measurement and compensation system for a 30,000 employee company. I know a little bit about this. I can tell you that Fox Lawson is a reputable consultant in this area. The overall approach and structure of what they have recommended is absolutely within the norm of good practice for such activities, whether it's private industry or public governance. The use of salary ranges is there are a lot of things about PERS that I don't particularly like, but in this case, they're right. We need to have salary ranges in order to make sense over time of how to govern compensation. I also wrote the compensation philosophy that one of these speakers referenced a minute ago. And yes, it's true that that compensation philosophy targets the 50th percentile. That does not mean everybody should be paid the 50th percentile. Compensation administration must go hand in hand with performance evaluation. And it is absolutely the case that a high-performing employee may well, perhaps should, I'm going to say should, be entitled to earn above the median. The natural result of shooting for 50th percentile in all cases is to produce mediocrity. What happens, whether we like it or not, our employees are a part of a labor pool. They all have choices. We have to have a system that allows us to attract and retain high-performance individuals, especially at the executive levels. These are the people that drive results for our organization. And I don't think our citizens want us to hire mediocre performers especially at the high. I'm not sure they want us to do that at all, but especially not at the executive level of operating this city. So, we are going to do what is the right thing. That's to establish ranges that give us flexibility to administer our compensation consistent with performance evaluation in this city. And I'll just add one more comment. The last person on the face of the earth that I would ask for advice on this issue is an editor of the Orange County Register who can't even get his facts straight, probably knows next to nothing about appropriate compensation management for large organizations, and yet feels it's appropriate to opine for God and the whole world about what's right for Newport Beach. That is totally wrong. He was totally wrong, and we are going to do the right thing in this city. We are going to manage compensation and performance on the basis of objective facts and support. That is what our citizens expect from us. They expect us to have a city that is well-managed and well-run, and that requires high-performance individuals that need to be paid appropriate to their performance. As long as I'm on council, that's what's going to happen if I have anything to say about it, and I do know something about this.
Thank you, Mr. Henn. Or as I like to say, in Orange County, the great thing about it is you've got 2 bankrupt newspapers telling you how to run your city like a business. Okay. The issue, though, before us is whether or not we're going to authorize this $35,000 for the city manager to use as a bonus pool for executive managers.
I'll support it, and thank you for your leadership that it's not personal.
Thank you. I see nobody shaking their heads. Everybody's okay with this? Okay, then let's move on to the next item, item number 7, the Newport Bay Conservancy. Mrs. Gardner.
Yes, the Newport Bay Conservancy has a long history here and done some tremendous work. However, I was surprised at the point of this. I'm uncomfortable with us getting into capacity building, which is what this is requesting as far as I can see. I assumed it was some sort of program we were going to work jointly, which we have done in the past. The reason I'm concerned is we have a number of organizations in the city, the Rotary Club, the Kiwanis Club, SPAN, Surfrider, all of which I'm sure could use capacity building. And I just don't know that, I just don't think this is our business, to be helping them get their ducks in order. They should have their ducks in order and then come to us and say, we have a plan for the Upper Bay, and we need some funds for our volunteers and that sort of thing. And that, to me, is the use of when the city should be stepping up.
I think, as you may appreciate, there's been some real instability in the organization, and there was essentially a takeover of the board, and the Back Bay was used as nothing more than a backdrop for partying by the previous board. So the people that are on this board are very committed. The purpose of the fund would be, as I understand it, for a part-time executive director. And the executive director is the one that will provide stability and direction and not have a completely volunteer organization, just as we might with the BIDS or some other organization provide a level of support. So it's seen as a part-time director, stabilizing kind of a thing. And they're going to help with the projects. They're helping with the Newport Canyon. They're going to help with Big Canyon. So they will get their volunteers out on weekends. And so that's where it was coming from. And I had asked that they go to the city manager and talk about their proposal. So it wasn't something that I negotiated with them, go talk to a professional about it. So that's how that was arrived at.
Thank you. I have the highest respect for the Conservancy and the people who are in the leadership over there, but I think I share Councilmember Gardner's concern that I'm not sure this particular funding application is ready for prime time. I think we ought to probably let them settle things out there and come to us with a programmatic recommendation down the line would be, I think, my preference. Any other comments? I think I failed to give the city manager a consensus, however, so...
Well, let me ask you this, Mayor. Would you be comfortable with $30,000 as a placeholder and then they come back with something programmatic?
Well, we could do that, or they could just come back with a supplemental request. Maybe that might be a better way to go.
What do you want to do, city manager? Do you have a view of it?
Either path works.
Okay.
Mayor Curry?
Mr. Petros.
With the recent decision that we made with the Balboa Theater Group, there were conditions that were placed. Now, the value was much, much higher, but there were conditions that were already predetermined for those funds before we acted or are going to act on that. I think that this is much the same way, that maybe we should ask for some conditions prior to funding this and it come back as a supplemental request.
Well, let's do that. I think we can work something out.
That's fine.
I mean, it's a fine organization, but we just need to be clear what we're spending the money on.
Okay, that works.
Okay, so we take care of that. Item 11, which was a transfer.
What is this?
So, remember, Jana Barbier has retired, our
Right.
cultural arts coordinator, so the thought was that that would not necessarily be a position we would fill with city staff. We'd transition to a contractor.
Okay, thank you.
All right, and we've decided that item 12 here is really not what we want to talk about because that's being funded by that $50,000 from Edison. So our comments on this page are 3 is on, 7 is off, 11 is okay. Everybody good with that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, next page. Okay, there we go. So on 4 and 3. Okay, so 4, our Arts and Cultural Master Plan.
I know when we were talking about the new fund that we thought it was important to have a plan, but man, $100,000 buys a lot of art. I mean, so is this like the high, or are we going to get back and have a chance to look at what the plan will be and everything before we actually spend the money?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
I'm trying to do a little bit of internet searching about what this might cost, and it can be everything from really thoroughly detailed public meetings and working groups and focus groups to something more basic. So this I would see as the high end. I would hope it would come in significantly less. You would see that. You'd see the contract before the expenditure.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. Item 3, Councilmember Daigle, this was, I think, your item on the streetlights circuit rehabilitation.
Yeah, do you have a slide?
We have an old slide, but I don't know if we have a way of projecting it.
Maybe Mr. Webb can create a word picture there.
All right, well.
This is the LED
This is
replacement.
the 2 circuits LED, and I'll give you a picture.
Let's try this. Leilani says we have a machine. Let's try this new technology here. It's always a little risky, but we have faith.
Yeah, that works great.
I gotta zoom in.
I'm zooming. Hold on.
You can read that in Hong Kong.
I got to read my own slide.
Oh, there you go. Any
slide in my notes.
Any 29-year-old CIA analyst could do that.
So we talked about this briefly, and what we're looking for is to, and this is just not for energy efficiency. We have old circuits in the city. This was 2 of our next circuits. These are the last 2 incandescent lamp circuits. About 129 lights in these 2 circuits with a cost of $645,000. There is energy efficiency notes on there. We're looking to, energy efficiency when we go from a current series circuit to a parallel circuit, and we also change to metered rates. We end up saving about 47%. Again, including LED lights and that. But this is work we'd have to do anyway. These are city-owned circuits, and they do need maintenance at some point. They're older. That's kind of the summary of the slide.
Well, what do people think?
This was one of my things that I did feel like we should do for a number of reasons, which Dave has suggested, but I think that this is, it's timely. He felt that we had it in our bandwidth to accomplish, and with what we may have as a gold lead building and other things that we're doing in the city, this seems to be right in our wheelhouse of making us a really energy efficient city, which is good for our environment, but also good for our bottom line.
I think it's a lot of money, but I would tend to agree with that. This is an investment in efficiency, and it also is an equity investment for the west side of the city, so I would support it for that reason, too. Okay. All right, so 3 and 4 we're okay with on that page. Did we have anything else? That was it. All right, so we've now reached consensus on the checklist. Is that all?
Although you probably want to take public comment.
We'll get there. I'm
Okay.
just asking the council.
All right.
Just one question. Then at the very bottom of the CIP, the bunch of civic center stuff, and that's what we're going to discuss separately in this item number 18.
Where are you seeing that?
At the bottom of the CIP program rebudgets.
Oh,
items.
yes.
It says civic center and parks, civic construction. There's about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 civic center It's not on this one, it's on the original printed list in our...
So on, what the council is looking at is a list of rebudgeted items that were not completed in fiscal year 12-13.
But are these the ones that we're going to be discussing in item 18 in more detail, or are these separate?
These would be rebudgeted. I don't think there will be further discussion of it in the next item.
Your presentation completed, Dan?
Yes.
All right, so there's nothing more. Are there any other decisions that the council needs to make relative to the budget other than the checklist we just went through?
No, you hold a public hearing, adopt the checklist, and adopt the budget.
I did have one question, just a clarification. We did talk about the Balboa Theater item, and so is that, I'm not exactly clear on that, because we were talking about sourcing, if we go forward with it, we were talking about sourcing it from FFP, the Facilities Finance Reserve. And so does that require any sort of designation, or is it even appropriate to make a designation? How do you, I'm just curious how you look at that.
What was the final decision on the Balboa Theater?
It was to establish, to rope off $3 million within the FFP as an assignment to be matched.
If it's an assignment, no further action is required.
Okay.
But we have your council's direction.
All right, if there's no further council questions, let me open this up then for public comment. If any members of the public would like to speak on the budget, please come forward. You can speak on all aspects of the budget.
Thank you, Mayor Curry and members of the council. My name is Jim Mosier. Of the things that just went by, I noticed particularly the two items having to do with arts and culture, and I would just like to remind you that a former city council quite a few years ago asked the people whether it would be appropriate to create a city arts commission and put that in our city charter, which we did. And the people at that time had the expectation that that commission would be holding hearings and making recommendations to you on all things having to do with arts and culture. And I just wish enough forethought had been given to this that you could be acting on those items, particularly the idea of contracting out the arts coordinator to that commission that is supposed to be overseeing those activities. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mosier. Other public comments, please come forward.
Good evening. My name is Laura Curran. So first of all, I often comment on the staff reports, and I would like to say to Mr. Matusevich that this staff report is actually reasonably well written overall. The reader can follow the logic, and the summary on page 3 ties out to the line items and the subcategories in the attachment A checklist for the most part. So thank you. I do have a question, however, related to better and smarter technology. So there is about $1.25 million allocated for IT, and then this item which calls for integrated financial and human resource and ERP system, computer-aided dispatch, online permitting, web and phone line applications to provide the community with convenient access to business applications. So it's not clear to me from looking at attachment A, the spreadsheet, what those items are, how much they're going to cost, who's taking the lead, where they are in the budget, are they part of the IT budget, etc. So it would be helpful to have clarification. So in closing, I appreciate the clarification on the items for better and smarter technology, and thank you for the report. My only suggestions would be in the future that you also include a calendar to update readers on other hearings that have also been held about this budget, and to make the numbering in the spreadsheet, attachment A, match the numbering on the presentation, though it is good to kind of see if you can keep making the ties work for the listener. And on a broader basis, I look forward to learning about these projects and reading the reports and the following through that these different assignments happen as these projects go forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers? All right, seeing none, I'm going to bring it back to the City Council. The budget is before us. The checklist has been gone through and secured. Is there a motion?
Move the item.
I would second the item.
A motion second. Is there any further discussion by the City Council? Seeing none, please vote.
The motion carries unanimously, 7-0.
Thank you. Let me just say a word to congratulate our Dan and Susan and our entire finance staff and Dave Kiff, our city manager, who once again have put together an outstanding budget with the support of a remarkably talented group of department heads who have reduced our workforce by 16 net positions, increased our police protection, allocated $60 million to capital projects throughout our city, produced a surplus, added to our reserves, preserved our credit rating, and once again have demonstrated, I think, superlative leadership of this community. And I just hope you feel the appreciation from this council and I think from the entire community.
Dr. Curry, quickly. As again, the new kid on the block going through my budget process for the first time, I want to thank you for spending the extra time with me to go through this. Quick procedural question, though. The materials that we were given before, will these be updated, or so we'll get revised based on the actions that we received? Okay, thank you.
All right, the next item is item 18, the Civic Center Park and project closeout accounting.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, tonight I'm hopefully bringing you to the end of a long, long journey. Started 5 years ago. Countless public meetings and processes that go with it. As you know, it's funded by a large part by $123 million of certificates of participation, with the remainder of the project being funded through our facilities reserve and special funding and set-asides. Right now, we're in line with our initial prediction of a $140 million budget. I'll just go through my presentation if we could have it up on the screen. So tonight we're asking you to do a couple of things, and what this really does is it's closing out the budgeting for the project, and to say that this is going to be the end of appropriations towards this project that cleans up all the accounting for the project. The three areas that we want to talk about are the contingency budget. First, we want to increase that budget from what was an optimistic $1.6 million at kind of 1.5% of the construction project to about $6.5 million, which is about 6%, which is a little more typical in construction projects of these types and sizes and complexity.
Were these changes that we requested?
These are changes that are outside of CW Driver's contract scope. I have some categories and I'll walk through, but generally they are changes due to building code issues and city requirements. There are also changes for unforeseen conditions, changes for design enhancements, and designs for changes because of design omissions in the plans or gaps in the plans that may have occurred. And I'll walk through some of the examples of that for you.
Okay, and then will you also explain to me, and I'm sorry because I feel like I'm ignorant here, but with this we had this whole thing that I thought that once we did the contract, unless we asked for a specific change, that CW Driver was supposed to analyze everything, and they would say this is the price, and then if it wasn't the price, then they ate it. If they did get the price or they were under the price, then they got to sell it. So will you explain sort of why that doesn't come into play here, because I'm not clear on that.
Yeah, the contract that we entered into with CW Driver is called the Construction Manager at Risk. And in that contract, we specified essentially a set of plans and specifications that were under that contract that they were to deliver. The differences in their contract are things that are beyond their control. If, let's say, during the building process we find that, we're not in compliance with a certain building code, that's something we reasonably probably would not have anticipated CW Driver as knowing that would happen. Things like, let's say we were doing excavation and we hit a bunch of rock, things that they would not reasonably foresee, unforeseen conditions. We had several of those in dealing with adding on to the existing library where the conditions weren't as the as-built plans certified that to be. We also had things that we elected as a city to add. In those cases, things like the zinc cladding on the elevator shaft on the San Miguel Bridge, or some enhancements that would improve the functionality of the building, or maybe save us money down the road for future expansion or future needs that we might have, that we might foresee. And then the last one is gaps in the plans. If the architect didn't put something in the plans that's required in order to construct the building, let's say that there are 4 widgets in the plans and they really needed 5. We couldn't expect driver to reasonably assume that we would need 5 because they didn't do the design. So these are the things that were specifically exempted in their contract as outside of the contract. And that's why we set up a contract contingency that was separate from CW Driver's contract that was for that purpose, for us to add in projects. And typically, there are change orders in every capital improvement project that we do. And in fact, most of our public works projects range anywhere from 5 to 10% in contingencies. So in this case, we're probably looking at about a 6% contingency, and we're still working hard, very hard, to negotiate down these change orders to maybe even see if we can get that a little lower. Does that answer your question? Okay, the second issue that we want to look at tonight with you is also we want to increase the general conditions. CW Driver, if part of their CM at risk contract, we also pay them on a time and materials basis to manage the project. That covers personnel, supervision, office trailers, and such. And since their contract ended technically ended at the end of December, they've been working on a time and materials kind of basis, and we think they are projecting that they would need an additional $1.4 million to cover their expenses, although we're going to negotiate that and hopefully get that for much lower.
Again, this would be because of the types of changes that you had just enunciated?
Right. A lot of the changes in the project, it caused the project to extend longer. While we were substantially complete in December of this year, there were a lot of things that did not kind of meet that schedule. There were material delays. There were some review delays. There were some design issues that came up. And it caused the project to be extended by another 3 months till we moved in at the beginning of April. So that time period and the time period we're using right now to kind of flush out the building is time that we would probably owe CW Driver some funds to pay for their overhead costs.
Steve, is this going to be the end of it, or do you anticipate additional requests?
This would be the
This
end
is
of
it?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
And the last item that we have on the list is to expand the construction support costs. And the same thing occurred with the architectural group that's doing the construction construction support services to verify the compliance with the plans and the conditions and the quality of the work. Their contract had ended at the end of the year as well, and they've been working at a reduced rate, and they're proposing some fees. We also have to pay them for some additional things that we've requested over time, and I'll walk through some of those items. I'd like to start with the contingency. The contingency was originally set for $2.6 million, about 2.5%. And again, that's in a separate account under city control. It's not part of CW Driver's contract. That is money that's outside of the project that's held by the city with the building committee's approval for expending it. Then later on in the year, we added the San Miguel Bridge, which effectively reduced our contingency to about 1.5%. And what we're looking at is approximately about 750 changes, more or less. Most of them are rather small, under $10,000. There are a few highlights and things in this. Because there's so many, I'm not going to walk through them all, but I will kind of give you kind of an idea of what they are and what they encompass. But on the screen in front of you, you can see that there are 4 categories, and these are the categories that are outside of the CM at risk contract, the guaranteed maximum price: building code, city requirements, unforeseen conditions, design enhancements, and design omissions. As you can see, the biggest number there is the design omissions, and I'll go through some reasons why that occurred a little later on in the presentation. But you can see the total, $6.5 million, which equates to about 6%. So starting with the building code city requirements, here's kind of some examples I pulled out of the proposed changes that we're working on right now and negotiating with CW Driver. Some changes because of Edison requirements, changes to fire code issues. There's some issues in there about revising the egress lighting at the libraries there. These are all kind of building code issues that come up during the project. And as you know, during plan check, we try to catch as many of those as possible. But, you know, as in all construction projects, if you've ever been involved in one, there's usually a few code issues that do pop up during the project, and we have to deal with them. And thankfully, most of them are relatively small, with the exception of some of the configuration changes we did for the Edison requirements. The next category is unforeseen conditions. These are things that you wouldn't normally expect the contractor to be aware of. The first one there on the list is repaired rain damage. We were fortunate enough to apply and receive reimbursement funds from FEMA, so that really is a net zero. There are some additional issues with connecting to existing storm drains that weren't where we thought they were. The library floor was a little wavier than we thought it would be, and we had to make some adjustments there to attach the new building to it. So there's some various other utility conflicts that have occurred. The San Miguel Bridge, when the foundation was being constructed, we found a bunch of utilities that were too close to the foundation, which required us to redesign the foundation. In fact, use a different style of foundation. So that was the additional add. And believe me, that was a lot higher. Driver did a heck of a job negotiating that down. Design enhancements is the area where we have added things. And I think these are the things that we look at and we discuss with the building committee that add value to the project, that improve functionality over time. They also maybe make it so that we have improved aesthetics, or they enrich the project in some way. And as you can see at the first one there, when the building committee reviewed the plans for the San Miguel Bridge elevator tower, we realized that plain concrete was rather stark looking. So the building committee quickly asked for some ideas on that and settled upon adding the zinc cladding. I think you'll agree, if you go out there and look at it, it's a lot prettier than just the old concrete slab. There are other things on this list, like some coating in the parking structure hardware, minor things, but things that are important to make sure we don't have streaking rust marks down the side of the parking garage. Things like adding motion sensors for the parking structure rooftop to minimize glare issues for the neighborhood next door. There's a number of other items in there, and I could pull out a million of them, but they're all good things that add value to the project, and I think we worked real hard to try to negotiate the best prices for those. The last category is the one that always gives most people the most heartburn, and this is really a lot of the little niggly things that happen during construction. And I'll just flip real quick to this next slide because well, we always say in the business there's no such thing as a perfect set of plans. And it's the old, if you ever heard the old 80-20 rule, it takes a lot more effort to get that last 20%. And get it perfect. So a lot of times plans are not 100% when they go out. In fact, the AIA architect, American Association of Architects there, they typically say 5% is a pretty average number for typical design changes in a project. The other issue too, and I want to point this out because this is really the city's doing, is we really pushed hard to get this project out the door when we went out to bid. And the reason why we did that was to take advantage of the bidding climate. As you recall, we were kind of at the bottom of the recession there, or at least the part where all the contractors weren't doing any work. So it was a really great time for us to bid this project out, get really good prices for materials and labor. Now, the downside of that was we pushed the plans out the door probably a little less complete than we would have liked.
Have we looked at any kind of comparison just for our own interest of, hey, if we held it up 6 months to make sure the plans were where we wanted them, what the difference in material cost might have been?
You know, I haven't really checked that closely, but I would guess. In fact, I was talking with some of the CW driver guys just recently, and we were talking about that the material prices have probably shot up, somewhere in a neighborhood of 6 to 10%. The labor costs have been always rising, even when it was bad. And the bidding atmosphere is a lot more competitive now. So there were a lot of contractors then that weren't working, that were willing to work just to make ends meet. So we hit it just right. And along with the financing part of that as well. Remember, we were moving forward quickly so we could take advantage of the bond market the way it was and the bond rates that were there. And I think the city did a great job jumping on that and really getting their best bang for the buck on the financing as well. So there's a trade-off here, and therefore, before we crucify the architect, I would say we actually probably net saved money because we were able to take advantage of those great construction costs and the financing. So I think, we were probably guilty of pushing the plans out a little too early. Could have worked on them a little while longer.
Steve, question for you. Did you identify and record value engineering items?
Yes, we did extensive value engineering during the design process. One of the things that we did, and I'll talk about later, is that we brought the architect together with the construction manager very early on in this project. In fact, we had several, probably about a year and a half of meetings during the design process, including meetings with the building committee, to talk about the various things that we could do to reduce costs. Everything from different ceiling materials to cladding to window configurations, window systems, floor systems, HVAC systems. There was a lot of discussion about value engineering and can we do that better and cheaper.
Okay, so for example, because we're thinking we paid this amount of money and we were getting these products, but let's say that instead of a platinum something or another, it was rubber or some cheaper material. I mean, how does that sort of factor into the overall cost and what your savings were?
Well, I think, I think during that process, we factored a lot of things. For example, the curtain wall system. When we looked at the curtain wall system, we were looking at kind of a patented...
You need to remind people what that is.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Very important.
The curtain wall is the outer shell of the building. It's the glass and the aluminum frame. I get a little technical jargon going. It's the public works director in me. But the outside of the skin of the building, essentially. And what we did, we originally specified some fairly expensive framing systems because we were concerned about some particular structural issues. But when we worked with CW Driver, we actually found a company that was willing and able to provide a substitute system that saved us over $1 million in costs. So these are the types of things that we went through, and we probably have some lists of the things we went through with the building committee and that we could share with folks if they wanted to see that. The last area that I wanted to point out is this design was very complex, and it's certainly a one-of-a-kind design, and so clearly there were some conditions that none of us had ever experienced before. Some of the odd angles. You just look at this council chambers and you look at the curved wall and the angle of the roof, and you can imagine there are going to be some odd situations where materials come together that need to be figured out, and maybe that design wasn't fully fleshed out. But the good news is, with all these changes, it's approximately 6%, which is actually a very good number and very typical for a project of this complexity. And again, I'll remind you that a lot of our public works projects go from 5 to 10%. So this is actually a really good number, so it's fairly good news.
So, Steve, I'm still a little bit at sea here about what it means, this design omission thing. So does it mean, for example, that because we hurried things along, there were certain parts of the project that were not designed and therefore not included in the original cost estimate for the project? Is that what that means?
That's what that means. It means that there weren't details in the plans for someone to bid on.
So, but wouldn't there have been some sort of a placeholder in the original cost estimate to cover that?
Yes, you're correct. There are some, depending on the item. There were, we went over with a lot of things with Driver. They actually had allowances. Yeah. There was a good example is this sliding door at the back of the council chambers. We knew we wanted to do that sliding door, but the design wasn't quite flushed out when we went out to bid. So an allowance was put in place.
So the 4.3 million, that's the amount over and above any allowances that might have been in place for the start. So that if we knew at the front end what the actual design was going to be, it would have cost more than what the allowance was.
Yes, it would have, yes. If we had 100% perfect set of plans, all of these items would most likely have appeared in the costs.
But there's probably some element of extra cost that we suffered because we didn't have the design in place at first. And so because we had to do it on the fly while we were building everything else, it added more to the total cost of the project than if the design had been available at the start. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, that's a fair statement. I think.
But that's not $4.3 million, right?
Not necessarily.
Mr. Hill.
Yeah, thank you. Because items come along later, you sometimes would pay a premium to work it in, but not necessarily. It just might be that it's worked into the sequence later, and so you're paying the price that is valid but no premium at that point in time. And design omissions are an extremely frustrating item. They're frustrating by my definition, by the most part, because they're surprises, because you think you've got something going and all of a sudden you have an additional cost. The way they're looked at by those that challenge them in court rulings, it comes back to the question as to whether or not you receive value from the change order. And if you receive value, then it's your project, and unfortunately it's your responsibility. It's just a surprise. If you are penalized because of the omission, then that's a legitimate claim, if you will. And I think that if I could kind of go up to 40,000 feet for a minute and look at this whole change order situation, which we screamed about all the way through the process, the numbers that we ended up with change orders, or that we are ending up with, because the process is not finished yet. We have the outside numbers that we're coming up to the conclusion on. These numbers have been scrubbed considerably. And one of the tremendous values that C.W. Driver brought to the table for us was the ability to be on our team in working with the subs in dealing with these numbers. What we don't have, and we probably should have tracked, was what these numbers started out being when the subs came in and said, oh, you want something else? Then here's the number on it. C.W. Driver bidding projects on a regular daily basis, more than just this project, obviously, we're able to come back and say, no, that's not a valid number. And we're able to negotiate these items down. So I think that while you are always vulnerable for a late design item coming in to add additional cost over and above what you would have received had it been originally bid, because of C.W. Driver's involvement, we absolutely minimized that particular exposure. So I think point number one is the contingency items were tremendously scrubbed. They started much bigger than they are and have been brought down. The second thing from a 40,000 view is, at least in my history of substantial projects, that you would like to have no change orders, but if you're in the 4 to 6 range, you're certainly in the ballpark. And a project of this complexity, and a project, and I always get in trouble for saying this, but when you hire an architect that says perfect is never completed, how can you be surprised when the project costs more? And to retain a 6% change order rate, I think is rather amazing in reality. When every project that we approve for our public works people, we give them a 10% contingency because that's closer to reality. one could ask, why didn't we start this project with a 10% contingency? And I think that's because we had an attitude that we wanted to crunch this project as best as we could absolutely crunch it. And we wanted to deliver a message by the process that we used with construction management and by the way we structured the deal, that we plugged in a 2.5% contingency to make the point that we were not going to accept a lot of change orders. And so I think that led to part of our success as well. And so what we're dealing with now is, buyer's remorse at the end of every project. And it's a shame that we have 6% in contingent change orders, but in the global picture, we probably came out pretty good.
Okay, so I appreciate that explanation. The point being, you've got $4.3 million up on the screen for design omissions. My understanding then, based on these explanations, is that that is a combination of value received and potentially straight excess cost. That there's some component of that $4.3 million that was value received, right? Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
We just don't know how much.
Absolutely, and no, we don't. But if I had to guess, I would say the majority of it is value received. All of it, well, I can't say all of it, but also a majority of it a surprise, but all of it, most of it, value received.
Okay.
So
We have a little bit more left.
A little more left. So I just wanted to kind of quickly go through the construction general conditions, and for folks that aren't familiar with that jargon, the general conditions are the part of the project that, of CW Driver's CM at Risk project that are the monthly fixed costs, and that's for supervision, personnel, equipment, field office, restrooms, computers and such, utilities. And then we pay that on a regular basis, on time and material basis every month. Their original schedule anticipated being done by the end of the year. We were substantially complete, but there's still, as I said before, many things that still lagged, and so they're still with us. What we did do, though, is we did move out the trailers. We moved them into the command center, and they're currently still there. We've reduced their staff continually since January. They're down to a very small skeleton crew right now, and they will be out of there by the end of this month. I've asked Driver to give me a price on that. They gave me a ballpark number of 1.4. We're going to sit down and look at that very heavily and scrutinize that and negotiate to see if there are any possibilities to bring that down. I'm optimistic that we can do so. But we needed to add this to the budget so we have the ability to negotiate. The last section of the actions recommended tonight is increasing the amount of extended fees for the BCJ design team, Volnzwinski Jackson. They had anticipated to be complete also by the end of the year, and so they've been working since January, and they have proposed to additional fees, but in recognizing the fact that some of the work that they're working on are things that were required, through design emissions and maybe schedule delays and things that they might have some culpability, they've agreed to reduce their fee by 50%. In addition to that fee increase, for that time from January till now, in fact, there might even be a few closeout things going in to the end of June. They're most largely done right now, but there are also some things that happened during the course of the project that changed their scope as well, including modifications to the San Miguel Bridge design. That would include the zinc cladding, readjusting the clearances and the drawings to do that. We also originally had part of the project was a willow sculpture from an artist named Patrick Doherty. And unfortunately, we weren't able to come into some contractual agreement with Mr. Doherty, and we had to change what would have been the willow sculpture into an alternative design. So there's a minor cost for design of revising that design, that landscape feature. As you also know, we ran into problems with the existing library clear story. Those are the windows that were existing windows that were high up in the building on the north side of the existing library before we started construction. And as a lot of folks know, those windows had leakage problems for years and years. So this was an opportune time to look into that and redesign that and rebuild that. So there was a good effort there. And there were a lot of miscellaneous issues, too, that came up along the way, including some additional architect visits and some revisions to the signage, because mostly when we downsized our crew and reorganized some of the departments, we actually changed the names of employees, or changed the names of jobs and areas and such, so some of the signing had to change. So their request is about $580,000. So I just also wanted to kind of walk through, just so you know, the final numbers. Here's a slide that pretty much shows our soft costs at about $19 million, our hard construction costs at almost $13 million. You'll notice that we've subtracted out some of the library repair costs. We did take advantage of the construction in order to fix a lot of existing problems with the library. It also shows that our FEMA grant in that number as well. The final number is all the ancillary costs of the project, including the contract inspection, our special inspection for quality control, and our FF&E without the, not including the deferred replacements, and our owner-controlled insurance program. So as you can see, our all-in costs are just under the $140 million that we talked about back in 2010. So I'll final by saying, you know, the project is a good investment. A lot of folks have kind of, you know, taken pot shots at this project, including the media, about, you know, how much money's being thrown around. As Dave has pointed out in a lot of his information, it's more than just a city hall. It's, you know, it's a civic center, it's a city hall office building, it's a park, it's a parking structure, it's a library addition, it's a civic center that's truly a place to gather. So we had a lot of investments into this building that add to the quality of the building. It adds value. So, you know, electing to excavate the site to achieve the view preservation, you know, costs us another $8 million. We have a state-of-the-art energy-efficient building that will ultimately save us millions over the life of the building. The quality of the project, we built in special controls to make sure we had a quality project. And we mentioned bringing on the design team and the construction team early in the process, and that was a real benefit. We outsourced our plan check and building inspection to avoid disruption to our building customers. The owner-controlled insurance program I mentioned, we definitely were well protected and in control of our costs, and we're pleased to announce that we've mostly avoided a lot of claims through that process. We had a very good safety program. And we also had this great opportunity to repair these ongoing building problems in our central library, which was about $1.5 million. So at the end of the day, it's good news. After 5 years of planning and lots of public meetings and design and permitting construction, we have met the originally projected all-in costs of $140 million. We capitalized on the recession, utilizing the benefits of the low material and labor cost market, and we've also proven that our private sector alternative delivery model for delivering this project, the CM at Risk, was really a cooperative process, and as Councilman Hill pointed out, this process saved us a lot. It really did. Having team members sitting at the table and really grinding out these issues and grinding down the costs and getting down to what's really important really made a huge difference. You know, we often hear about these projects that have, you know, 50%, 100% overruns. This project, we're proud to say we've had a 6% change order rate, which is pretty typical and standard. So now we have an iconic civic center that makes us stand out, and it gives us a renewed sense of community pride. And I think this will be a gathering place for many years to come, and I think something we all can be proud of. So I'm happy to have been a part of this, and that concludes my report.
Thank you, Mr. Vader. Are there any further questions? Is there public comment on this matter? Please come forward.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. I'm Deborah Allen. I live at 1021 White Sales Way, which is basically across the street from the Civic Center. I just want to speak to the issue of the overall payment. And by the way, I'm not suggesting that that you shouldn't pay the architects the additional $579,000. But I do want to point out a couple of things that from a citizen's point of view, we noticed they didn't do that were set out in the EIR, and that the city volunteers, our city council members, particularly the building committee, had to step in and do. First of all, one of the comments in the 46-page staff report on this subject is a number of meetings that the architectural firm had, meetings they had in San Francisco and meetings they had down here, and one of the things you're getting billed for. But it seems to me that there were a couple of glaring omissions, if you will, that they didn't see and that had to be fixed by the city. And I point them out now because I think this is probably our last chance to point them out. First of all, let me thank Councilman Selich and the Building Committee for solving many of the problems in the report earlier tonight on the Building Committee. Consideration of the neighbors' concerns of landscaping and lighting. I certainly support the Building Committee's decision to have trees that screen and soften the view from the library and the parking structure. I brought you a couple of pictures. Many of you have seen this from my house, and those of you who haven't, I'll give the pictures to the city manager and you can look at them. I didn't want to spend all the money to make all of these in 7 or 8 copies. But this is what it looks like. It looks a bit like a prison from the other side of the street from our neighborhood. This is the area between the library and the parking structure. So certainly having trees that fill that in is a big improvement. However, it's not anything new, because it was actually required, if I can quote you from the EIR, page 4.3-49, the proposed project will include the planting of dense shrubbery along the east face of the parking garage along MacArthur Boulevard to assist in screening the project site. So it was there all along. Next, I would suggest that we are very supportive of the screening of the parking structure itself from MacArthur with additional plantings that are tall rather than the little pygmy plants that are there now. And finally, on the lighting, I appreciate your efforts to turn the lights off earlier. Maybe other people want to speak to the lighting because I know that's been an issue. But I would also point out that that was also in the EIR. Very quickly, page 4.1-36, quote, automated internal blinds in the City Hall Administration Building to form part of the glare control strategy, as well as assist in the reduction of nighttime light pollution to neighboring sites.
Thank you, Ms. Allen.
Thank you.
Next, please.
Good evening, Denise Oberman. I wanted to just mention a couple of things. One is that it is the design professional's responsibility to be aware of building codes and ordinances going into the design and the design phase, and to deliver up plans in such a manner so that it assures code compliance. It's also the construction manager's responsibility to review the plans and determine and kick back prior to construction and even pre all the value engineering exactly what does need to be done for a plan to be considered adequate, and presumably there was a budget going in. C.W. Driver was retained on a contractual basis as a construction manager at risk, and what that means is that they will participate in both the windfalls, if you will, associated with the efficiency and the quality of their work, and also the wipeout, if you will, or the cost or the risk associated with items coming in either over budget or not as they had anticipated. So, yes, unforeseen conditions is something that would typically occur in a project, and certainly applying the reasonableness test makes sense. Building code requirements, I would urge the council to send this back to staff and really look at what the professional responsibilities were, and to hold the design firm and the contractor accountable for what they may or may not have done. They have mechanical electricals. They should have known what the electric utility requirements were. And it shouldn't be our responsibility as a city or for all of us citizens as taxpayers to absorb that. Design enhancement, that probably can be described too. I know that there was a lot of effort to make an aesthetically superior and exceptional building. It is the architect's responsibility to advise the client about aesthetics versus functionality, and if there are issues, to point them out. So the design enhancement number appears to me to be a bit excessive, and certainly it should have additional scrutiny, in our opinion. And lastly, design omission is exactly that. Omission goes hand in hand with potentially error and potential liability, and there can be no excuse for design omission, and particularly with a broad number of $4.3 million. So we would encourage the council to reject that and to send this back to staff, maybe with a parameter in the range of what the original contingency amount was prior to the bridge, and also maybe some factor in here for unforeseen conditions in Building City. Thank you. 6.5 is excessive.
Mr. Allen?
Barry Allen, and I live with the eminent Deborah Allen, just right across the street. Mr. Badum, Mr. Kiff, all these people have been very, very cooperative with our association and with our concerns, and the City Council has been listening to us for a long time about these things. I want to talk about something different that I think you ought to do. My entire career was spent basically as an insurance defense counsel or representing public entities. The public entities never told me how much money they'd give me to go out and settle a case. They told me to go out and see what the demand was, and then come back to them, and they decide how much to give me. Today, this is all in a public hearing. It's all on tape. I'm assuming CW Driver, BCG, everybody else knows exactly what the figures are. I submit that what you ought to do is you ought to say, yeah, maybe you got some good ideas here, but go back and negotiate with these people and then come back to us, because they now know how much you're going to pay. So, I mean, where's the negotiating? I don't understand. I mean, they're now asking you to give them their money, and then they're going to go back and negotiate it. I don't understand that. I think the whole thing should be put on hold until after the project is completed, because there's some things that still have to be done. And one of them is the problem with the sale. Now, let's face it, the man, unless he was completely misquoted in 2 newspapers, said there's something wrong with the sale, and he was from BCJ. He was from the company. So, I mean, they got to fix that. And I assume that's the redesign isn't in here. There's other things that should be fixed. They were supposed to put in shades in the place, and the shades aren't there. We're going to get additional costs for that. I don't think this is going to be the end of the cost from BCJ for design and things like this, because there's still things that have to be done to comply with just to comply with what the contract is, and to comply especially with what the EIR was with regard to light spillage. I just don't understand why we want to give this amount of money to people to negotiate with and say, this is what you got. Obviously, CW Driver and BCJ know what you got. But they're going to come back for something more if, in fact, they want to redesign the sale or you come up with something else. I completely agree that the architect and Driver are entitled to a lot of money for extra work they did, because let's face it, when this project was originally thought about, when Rush Hill was on the design committee, when they were first trying to select a designer, they weren't even talking about anything to do with the library. All that was completely added on to it, and that's certainly things that they're entitled to be paid for, and so is CW Driver. I'm not saying they're not entitled to a lot of this money. I'm just saying you don't negotiate a case by telling people this is the maximum we're going to pay, and then send poor KIF and bait them in to negotiate with them when they already know what the figures are. Let's withhold that and decide how much we're willing to pay after we hear from them. And finally, I think you ought to wait until the thing is completed and you're willing to say, okay, we don't need anything more from the design team, we don't need anything more from CW Driver, then we should be hearing this before you at this time. And that's what I have to say, and I thank you very much for your time.
Very much. Next speaker, please.
Mayor Curry and members of the council, my name is Jim Mosier. As someone who has trouble completing anything, I always admire those who are able to accomplish what they set out to do. But what bothers me most about this is that many of the design decisions were either instigated or approved, and some of those decisions increased costs, some of them decreased costs, by the council's so-called ad hoc building committee. We heard a report earlier this evening about some of that committee's recent decisions on your behalf. We've heard their name over and over again, the building committee. But to the best of my knowledge, the building committee never once met in public, at least at a publicly noticed meeting, and with the exception of the San Miguel Street Bridge, they never sought general public input before making a decision or brought one back to the full council. And even then, in the case of the bridge, we see in the report, and we heard again several times tonight, that they changed the publicly approved design by adding the special zinc finish. And I guess no one, in the public at least, knows who chose and approved the bunnies that decorate the park. To me, this lack of transparency and openness is at odds with the fundamental principle in California that public bodies act and deliberate in public. The committee seems to think that design decisions of that sort are details that the public doesn't need to know about. But in the words of the newspaper man who wrote the preamble to the Brown Act in 1953, the people in delegating authority do not give their public servants the right to decide what is good for the people to know and what is not good for them to know. 60 years later, I think that's still an eloquent statement of a very sound principle of good governance, and that the public, the whole public, should have been witness to this process, to the whole process, and not just seeing the results here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mosier. Next speaker, please.
Good evening. My name is Laura Curran. I live in Corona Del Mar. So I'd like to talk about item 18, the Civic Center project. So this closeout requests an increase in the contingency of 300% from 1.6 million to 6.5 million has been discussed. So to revisit an ongoing issue that I've brought up on multiple projects, we were asked to approve as citizens a 300% increase based on a poorly written, uninformative staff report. So the discussion points, for example, the title of the report was Closeout Accounting. It doesn't clue the reader in that we're being asked to vote on a $4.9 million contingency increase. And honestly, as much of an accounting geek as I can be, closeout accounting does not get my attention as much as $4.9 million contingency increase. Second, this was a construction manager at risk contract, and I knew that because I followed it in 2010. But if I had not known that, I would not have read about it in the staff report. So I had the same question as Councilmember Gardner. How does the CM at risk contract tie in to this particular request? It's information that's relevant to residents who are trying to keep track. And in any case, most of the risk appears to have been borne by the city. The report didn't clarify what items led to the contingency increase versus those that were covered in a separate scope of work. And honestly, what I was looking for as I read this report was a spreadsheet, just like we had in the prior staff report. If we'd had that, I probably wouldn't have even come to council tonight. I actually saw that information that we were looking for in Mr. Badham's report, and that was useful. But if that wasn't available, then we should have waited until it was available, included it in the report, and then held the meeting, because it would have helped a lot of folks with a lot of questions they may have had. The report also talked about the contingencies in various categories and some of the detail that we were looking for. For example, you're asking us to look at $6.5 million. Without a spreadsheet, we can't tie how those numbers go together. For example, on the architectural expenses of $123,000, what are the changes? What was the cost? What was travel versus construction administrative expenses? That wasn't clear. The BCJ contract extension for $576,000 was from January to June. Have we already incurred those costs, and now we're being asked to vote if we can pay for them? Because if that's the way it works, I want to get in line for that type of a system. So, in any case, the staff report provides lots of information. It had 40 pages of attachments, but there was really no clarification. And, you know, we have a finance committee that looks at these types of reports. We have staff that knows how to compile reports in some cases. And I'd like to see our staff provide this information completely to our council and our residents in the future as we're being asked to make 300% increases and $5 million decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Curran. Are there any other speakers? All right, seeing none, I'm going to close public comment and bring it back. Is there a comment or motion?
Mayor Curry?
Mr. Petros.
Pardon me. There were some comments early on in the public remarks, I don't remember who it was by, that started with the notion that the prior City Hall was fine. We didn't need to leave there, that it was a completely operable location. I have, in my consulting life, worked for builders and for the city for decades. And I can tell you that that structure was unsafe, unsanitary, and not a place that I would like to go. It was not a community center. It was a very difficult place to hold meetings. There was no space in it. It didn't have the sense of being part of this community. And so we built this civic center that houses a library, a parking structure, the city hall, and multiple parks. And it has become the lightning rod for public controversy because of the high costs. It has been under the microscope for glare, for the image from all sides, for its cost. We had flyovers, we've had protests. It's been all there. When we talk about, though, a storm drain or a sidewalk project or some other part of our capital improvement, and we have a contingency that's set about 10%, and we hit that, that's part of doing business. We've done the Oasis Center, and that came in on budget. This is a lot of money. Yet, as a percent of the total budget, it is, in the industry, an acceptable percentage. I am not denying that this is a lot of money, but it is within the range of acceptability for a construction project of this magnitude. I think the thing that disappoints me the most, and I would like to hear how we can remedy this in the future, is as Ms. Curran brought up, the notion that a lot of this work was done and now we're coming back to it. I feel that, Mr. Mosier, I stand in line with you. There's a lot of this that I was caught flat-foot as a city councilman, and as we move forward and we embark on some other capital projects, I'm interested to ensure that this is minimized on those projects, that this council, representing the citizens, has adequate information to assist you early on should these types of occasions arise. That's my obligation to the folks that are sitting out there. I feel in a manner that my hands are tied a bit, that this is the train's left the station and I don't have the ability to tell driver or the architect no. And that takes away my authority and my obligation to the residents of Newport Beach. But be that as it may, I do agree that this is well within the parameters of an acceptable construction contract, and will be supporting this. But I am interested on how we can address this on a go-forward basis so that we're informed and can do our job on behalf of the citizens.
Thank you, Mr. Petros. Mr. Selich?
Thank you. Well, I think that when we take a look at the items that are before us, that obviously the biggest item is the so-called design omission. And I think as we look at this, as Councilman Hill did from a very broad perspective, that we went out with a 90%, whatever it was, set of plans to take advantage of an extremely favorable construction environment to be able to save money on the construction of the building, knowing that some of these things were probably going to take place. I think probably the biggest mistake, if any, that we made was that we cut that original contingency too low. We've come in within industry norms on the project as it stands tonight and being presented to us, but the initial contingency was awfully tight given the fact that we did not have complete plans at the time. But at the end of the day, for the $140 million, I'm convinced that we got good value for our money. And not only did we get good value because of the fact that we went out and started this project in a very favorable construction environment, but we also got good value because we essentially built 6 projects at one time. If we would have built 6 different projects, either in this location or 6 different locations in the city, we would have paid a substantially higher premium for doing that. So at the end of the day, this project came in close to what we originally estimated. We tried to come in under that. We worked very hard at it through all the value engineering. Some of the value engineering was done by the building committee. Some was done by the staff and the construction manager. But a lot of thought and effort went into it. When we look at the so-called design enhancements, a lot of thought was given into constructing a building that would stand the test of time, both from a design standpoint as well as a material standpoint. One of the problems that many cities face is they tend to build their buildings cheap up front and they pay for it later. In fact, we're doing that right now in this city because we built our police facility some 40 years ago, and it's basically a tilt-up building that now that it's in need of remodeling, it's functionally obsolete, and we can't remodel it. We need to replace it. That probably turns out in the long term to be false economy. So $140 million, it's a lot of money, but when you take into effect that we got 6 separate projects put together at one time, and we built it in one of the most favorable construction environments we've had in many years, I think that the $140 million is money well spent.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor?
Councilmember Gardner.
To tag on a couple of things that Councilman Petros said, I think that part of it is that as far as the committee, that, you know, it was like you have all the responsibility and all the problems, and we just sort of, the rest of us got to skip along. But it's probably up to us in the future to say, as we form these committees, here's when we want you to come back to the council and have more input. I also agree with Mr. Petros that there isn't a lot we can do at this point, I don't think, except to urge staff to continue to negotiate, because I agree with our residents who spoke that it seems like some of these things are a lot of their faults as well. And obviously the architect is recognizing them because there's already been a 50% cut, according to you. But to continue to grind, I think is what I would recommend.
Mr. Henn.
I would just add one further comment. You know, we talked about these design emissions. There is some component of that is excess cost. And I still can't help but to think that the architect has some culpability there. And so as you're going back to talk about this, it's pretty clear to me the architect should not get a clear pass on those negotiations and those hard negotiations, especially in light of the fact that we're awarding another $500,000 to them, some of which I still can't escape the feeling might have had to do with some of their errors. to start with are some of those design emissions.
Councilmember Daigle? You're done? I'm sorry, excuse me. Getting late. Okay, are you all done? Is there a motion?
I'll move the action.
Motion, is there a second?
I'll second it.
All right, please vote.
The motion carries unanimously, 7-0.
Thank you. Item 19, which is the second amended and restated employment agreement with the city manager.
I'll move the item.
The motion, is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion on the council? Is there any public comment? Please come forward.
Mayor Curry and members of the council, my name again is Jim Mosier. I have a concern about this that's very similar to my concern about the last item. Not until the release of the staff report last Thursday night did the public learn that there was a so-called council working group developing details of a new contract for the city manager. If the working group was selected at one of the 5 closed sessions that were publicly noticed to evaluate the performance of the city manager, I would have hoped that the creation of the committee would have been publicly announced. It would seem to me to be a reportable action. I don't know legally if it is or not, but it seems that the public should know that somebody was off working on this. Even if the working group appeared out of thin air by spontaneous generation, and even though the Brown Act allows less than a quorum of you to get together to deliberate about matters, it would just seem to me to be a matter of good public policy that the public should be informed that there is a group working on a public issue. By failing to inform us, the public has no idea that any council members are working on a contract, let alone which 3 council members, and that precludes the possibility that we can contact you, provide input to you, or whatever. This may be a small issue, but it's not a good trend, I think, to be operating that way. And the problem is that group, having reached a consensus on this, brings it back to you, and now publicly, that group of 3 only has to convince, as one of our council members has pointed out, just one of the 4 remaining colleagues, and whatever that recommendation is becomes the will of the council, and the public has very little influence over it. So I don't think it's a good means to be doing business. It may not be apparent to the audience. The contract also raises the question of compensation. We heard quite a lot from various public speakers about compensation earlier this evening. I don't really have an opinion about whether the city manager is paid more or less than he should be, but about the compensation for city employees in general, it might be helpful to remind you of an earlier time when the expectation was people working for government would receive pay very much less than those doing a comparable job in the private sector. And the incentive that was offered to them, or incentives that made that palatable and made those jobs attractive, other than working in a nice city and a nice work environment like here in Newport Beach, was that their jobs were very secure. They had a retirement that was much better than they would be able to find in the public sector, in the private sector. And they had a clear path to promotion through hard work and civil service exams. I think that's still a good model, and it would take quite a lot of political will to get back to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mosier. Are there any other speakers? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to council. Anyone wishing to speak? Seeing none, please vote. Petros doesn't vote.
I don't either.
It's your right hand, not your left hand.
Oh, sorry. I'm not swearing, I'm just...
The motion carries unanimously, 7-0.
Thank you very much. We have an adjournment tonight. Councilmember Gardner.
Yes, thank you. Ellen Ingram died just a few days ago, sorry. My neighbor. She was born in 1918 in Colorado. Her mother died in the Spanish influenza epidemic, and she was adopted by an aunt and moved to California. And she met her husband, J.P., on a blind date. And he was in the Navy and was involved with World War II. They moved to Newport Beach early on, and those who are my age and younger will remember her probably as the school nurse at Harbor Ensign for a number of years before becoming head of health services for the Newport Mesa School District. Anybody who's lived as long as Ellen did, I could go into a lot of detail, but I think for me, just she and JP, who predeceased her, were ideal neighbors. I couldn't have asked for two nicer people to live next to. They were always so eager to help. They were generous with their time and with their concerns. And I will miss her, and JP I miss already. Fortunately, I went to school with their daughter, so I'll still have some contact with the family. But in memory of Ellen Ingram.
Thank you. And with that, we are adjourned.
Mayor, is there any motion for reconsideration?
Is there a motion for reconsideration?
I won't read it.
Seeing none,
Thank you.
we are adjourned.